that's the essence of communication, though, basically.
Yeah.
Like, there's so much Shaman King stuff about that, about, like, um, love is basically trust, and, like, there's
Mhm.
all these things that feel like, I mean, Shaman King is a text that goes, I use, like, the Hesed Gebera framework a lot for talking about some of these, like, dilemmas people have
Mhm.
online, and Shaman King is
Yeah.
like a text that often takes Hesed pilling to what almost feels like sort of repugnant conclusions or like really extreme, but at the same time it has a strong Gebera foundation that's identified
Yeah.
largely more so with, I mean, I guess almost identified with, like, we had the discussion about Steven Universe in here at one point, and
Mhm.
how Steven Universe has this whole thing where it's like we're
Yeah.
they're he's gonna sort of talk everybody into, like, solving all their
Into
problems. Yeah, yeah,
reconciliation.
into
And Shaman
reconciliation.
King has like nobody who sees ghosts is truly
Mm-hmm.
evil.
Which that the implicit exception case in that is something
Mhm.
that the I spend a lot of the Jesus Christ Shaman King fanfic that I wrote over the
Mhm.
3-day Easter writing experiment, or mostly wrote, um, like, grappling with, like,
Mhm.
especially insofar as like Howe's motive is very much articulated around that in particular, and with Jesus, I wanted to think simultaneously from the perspective of, well, the whole sort of Christian disenchantment of the world thing is to some extent implies a project of making a world for non-shamans. But
Mhm.
on the other hand, the whole, like, all the salvation versus damnation passages are very much implying, like, okay, we're going to figure out who actually is, like, we're going to, like, Hesed Max to an absurd extent in order to determine who actually is capable of salvation or not. And if, like, you actually aren't capable of it, well, uh, good luck. But yeah, um, so there's, and I'm still working out some of the sort of theological implications in text. There are still passages that I'm, like, turning over, but
Mhm. Yeah, I got to get back to Shaman King. I took a break after Osores and Revoir or however you pronounce it.
yeah,
Because that just felt like that felt like a good place
it's such a
to
good
take a break.
arc. It's such a good
It's such a
arc.
fucking good arc. Holy shit. Oh my god, I love Anna so much. Um,
Uh, I'm here a little late. I was at my sister's musical my sister was in. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, I don't know if I'm going to
Hello.
read something. Well,
Hi.
we
hello.
have another one that comes in.
Yeah.
All right. Um, I'll be on the road soon, so I won't be talking much, at least in the beginning.
Wait, is that? Oh my God. I forgot your name, but hi.
Yo, hi.
I'm a longtime admirer. Angie told me about you in like 2018, 19.
Whoa, that's scary. Who is this? Who is this?
I wish I could link you my Twitter. I don't use it anymore. I used to go by Caroline Foley on Twitter, if that
Oh,
rings a bell at
yeah,
all.
it's been a long time. Hi.
Oh my God, hello.
Yeah, I have not been on Twitter in months. I was off for
Yeah.
I was off for a while and came back just like at the beginning of the month, and it's just nothing there.
Mm-hmm.
I really want
Almost
to, like, coordinate more people to use Blue Sky. Just
I know it
Yes.
feels like an inevitability, but I don't know.
yeah, the
I go on
current
and there's like
culture
2
is
posts a day. I don't understand. Everyone's like, "Oh, Blue Sky is so cringe. Blue Sky," everyone like yells at you. I've never seen any of that. I know I only have like 20 followers or whatever, but I've never seen any of that on the site itself.
well,
I
my
think it depends on how
experience.
many follows you have.
Yeah.
What?
Because like when you have more, you get put on the discover feed, and then like the
Mhm.
type of person to use the discover
Okay.
feed starts commenting.
I think
It
that would just
starts
be
with my
fun. I think that would be
drivel.
really fun to
It
react
would.
to, though.
And to
It
be
is
fair,
fun
I
for
still
some
never
people.
get yelled at. I don't know how it doesn't happen, given I'm always having really weird meta contrarian opinions, but like I barely ever get yelled at, but I do see a lot of stuff that's like the people who I've found to be most using Blue Sky when I like deliberately look for people who are using it to like have conversations and stuff. It's either like liberals who are posting Trump news 24 hours a day or
Hashtag
like
resistance. Yeah.
really, really niche, like queer furries having absolutely like incomprehensible beef that goes on for months at a time.
hmm Hello, Angie. I name dropped you like 3 minutes ago.
Hi, I'm so late, but I was
So what?
late.
It's okay. Things haven't started yet.
I'm late, as in the late dentalizer dent.
Your microphone is so.
Yeah, your
Yeah,
microphone
this
is
is
a
this
little
is this
fucked.
problem.
Hold on a sec.
This isn't the first time she's done this in a call. I love it.
Oh yeah.
Oh, she's precious. Calling from the inside of a wind tunnel. It's Angie Nostiquet. I was gonna say, like, the thing is with Blue
How's
Sky.
this compared to before?
Oh, pipes in heaven.
Oh my god.
Oh no, now I can't hear you.
Sort of.
I don't even remember what I was trying to say. I'm like laughing. Oh, should I continue what I was saying?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
Go ahead.
yeah. I don't remember who it was, but when I was on Blue Sky, I really wish I didn't quit it along with Instagram, because like on New Year's Day I made a resolution to just like quit social media, not including Discord, which is very hypocritical of me, but
Discord is a fucking like it's Skype too. It's not social
yeah.
media.
Yeah, it's just like very expanded direct messaging. Yeah. Hello again, and
Some people
Relegated
use
to
Discord
phone
as social
posting
media.
once more.
you sure have been. Yeah, you're coming in clear, queer and clear. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yippee. I had a lot of fun doing my poems last week. I want to get in the habit of doing 10 during these and just like build them up during the 2 weeks and do them at the beginning. I didn't do them, so I can't do them at the beginning, but I'm gonna do it like Imperial Court style and just like draft a few while we're talking and burst in later with
Okay,
them. And
sweet.
it'll be great.
Imperial court style is a really good way of putting it. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, we are under umbrellas by the Charles River. That's what we're doing.
Yeah, period.
Yeah, I was hoping to get a certain controversial so-called e-girl in here, but I don't think she's showing up.
Explain what her deal is again, because every time you show me her, she's just like saying stuff, and then I ask, "Oh, what's her deal?" and you just say, "Oh, she just says stuff."
Well, she's
That's
like
that's an accurate description.
kind of just a like I guess like a communist Lacanian theory person who did a sort of like frustrated with the left epistemics thing and got very into Christian esotericism and is still on the left,
cases.
but in some sense, but trying to, like, has this kind of, I guess, like, constantly shifting total hermeneutic system that's, like, Catholic, sort of Catholic philosophy combined with Lacan, combined with Kabbalah, combined with, like, a lot of books. Like, I think I'm trying to figure out what the main points that would have been relevant to the discussion last time would have been, because I'm almost like, I'm not 100% sure I understand myself, which is why I would have wanted to, like, hear it, like, articulated in direct conversation, but, like, it's the thing where, I guess, like, the thing is, on some level, it feels like another attempt at doing, or, like, catching the same current, to use, like, the occult terminology, as you were riding in 2018, 2019. And as much as I understand from seeing all of these different iterations of that current, like, why you chose to get off it, I'm also, like, frustrated because there are so many people out there doing it worse. Like,
Yeah, I get it. Yeah,
I got, like, an
it is that
Instagram ad for something called
associativity.
Prude Magazine a little while ago.
Yeah,
I still haven't
at
checked
least
it
the way
out,
I
but
understood it is just like this kind of associativity that gets more urgent the more it expands, is at least
yeah.
how it felt. Like, oh shit, I just realized this thing that just reconfirms everything I was doing. Oh fuck, now there's this thing, and like, I don't know,
Okay,
that goes
that's
a long
actually a
way
good
until you burn out
framing,
on it.
actually. Because that is, I guess, like, that is still what I do a lot. Like, my own sort of esoteric hermeneutic stuff, which, like, literally there's the oath of the abyss, like, to take everything as, every phenomenon as a direct interaction of God with your soul. And, like, it's sort of, what that means is this kind of open question, and I'm guessing if Anna KW were here now, she would actually say that's really fucking stupid. You can't do that without mediation. You can't do that without, like, the guidance of a sort of structure of prior interpretations that goes back, that sort of goes back and up through every other level in, say, the history of the church. Now, I don't particularly trust a lot of that history for reasons that should be fairly obvious.
And even if you are sympathetic to it, like fully going on board with that and taking that as just like the taken for granted structure, like you are subsuming yourself to that and like choosing to follow that instead of like actually figuring stuff out by your own terms. And again, that isn't like an epic free thinking thing. It's just like you are deciding to support that project like above your own like understanding
Yeah.
of what you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, like, if I'm permitted to take this a little meta, I'm
You're
starting to
not permitted,
notice.
Angie.
I'm
Please.
starting to notice like a sort
Nothing
of.
is true. Everything's permitted. I had to.
Thank you, thank you. I'm starting to notice a sort of like hermeneutic turn in like theory discourse.
Logo was doing that years ago, so
Yeah, Logo was doing that years ago, but I'm also noticing, like, Anna's fixation on hermeneutics. You keep talking about hermeneutics, and I think like the most obvious thing is just like the resurgence of Straussianism. Like, I have been plotting my triumphant return to Substack at some point in the next 2 months. As soon as I can get all of my like documentation sorted out so that I can like publish like while remaining relatively anonymous. And you see a big part of my triumphant return is supposed to be like an analysis of neoconservatism as an intellectual phenomenon and why it's not the same as liberal interventionism, why it's not the same as like just the Bush administration, etc.
People
And a
thinking
big
Bappin was just a neocon always drove me nuts.
Yeah, he is definitely not. He is absolutely not a neoconservative. A big part of like why I was writing it is to explain like, for instance, why Michael Flynn, for instance, qualifies as a neoconservative, even with his embrace of Russia and QAnon. Why QAnon draws from neoconservative thinking in large part. And as well, why all these fucking people in these sort of quote unquote intellectual dissident spheres are so happy to embrace Douglas Murray, for instance, who is a self-termed neoconservative, and the sort of intellectual lineage linking large parts of this a certain specific kind of critique of wokeness with the same neoconservatism that you can find in Irving Kristol's work.
While meanwhile, I do see a lot of liberals on Blue Sky pointing out that the neoconservatives have been some of the most resistant to MAGA or at least some of them, like Bill Kristol coming out and being like, what the fuck, this isn't what we were fighting for.
That's so funny.
Mm-hmm. Some of them,
That's
yes.
actually hilarious.
Bill Kristol, definitely a neoconservative. Definitely can't argue there. But also I want to argue that Bronze Age Pervert is also straight up a neoconservative.
True. Yeah.
And
Hello,
I think hi. And I think sort of an essential part of this is the usage of particular hermeneutics. I think that one of the things that distinguishes neoconservatism, I believe, is that it is first and foremost a civilizational nationalist project. That it's sort of distinct from Christian nationalism or Jewish religious or ethnic nationalism or white nationalism or any of the other sort of racial nationalisms and ethnic nationalisms that you can find. That rather the idea underpinning it is that Western civilization held to encompass Europe, America, and Israel first and foremost, is a single circle, a single hermeneutic circle, which values can only exist within that circle, and attempting to step outside of that circle means the absence of any values relevant within the circle. Hence why, like, you know, moral clarity, for instance, the big catchphrase of neoconservatives from like the 80s to the 2000s, the same catchphrase that was used to like deny like comparisons between like, you know, torture by like Saddam's prisons and torture by like CIA and their black sites. It explains why that phrase seems so peculiar to like somebody of like a moral universalist persuasion, which is that it claims that values are binding and in some sense absolute but not universal. That is, an action undertaken to preserve the circle in which values exist cannot be judged by the standards that are applied within the circle to itself. As such, torturing people in Guantanamo Bay because it is an action used to defend the circle cannot be judged by the same standards as, you know, the circle uses to judge like Saddam torturing people in his prisons. It's a little convoluted, but I think that's kind of the point. I think that is like kind of the point of it.
It's all a mental.
Is this substantially different from the idea of the state of exception? Like, is it just sort of like a?
I think
transcendental state of exception, because the ideas are very related.
Oh yes,
it's about how the state of exception is articulated, right? Like this is a particular position on what is and isn't that, because at its limit you'll have people just saying, okay, all politics is that, and they do seem to be saying no, the state of exception is a specific thing defined by something outside itself, which is this like hermeneutic, like civilizational tradition.
Okay.
Yeah, it's also the reason why like neoconservatism has like particularly odd views on things like democracy. Why undemocratic actions at home can be justified to quote unquote promote democracy abroad. The idea being that there is no actual commitment to democracy as such. The point was never to actually, for instance, turn Iraq into a democracy. The point was to turn Iraq into a state which buttresses the interests of the states within the circle. Democracy within the circle itself, within the Western civilization itself, democracy within Western civilization itself can only be articulated as a good from the frame of the civilization that produces the democracy, which is not itself a democratic endeavor, but rather an aristocratic endeavor.
I have been thinking about that word a lot. Just like, I don't think there's very many people on just any side nowadays who like truly believe in democracy as it, not as is, but like democracy as defined. I don't think very many people are attached to the concept or just like have a strong idea of how it should look.
This is another thing that drives me crazy on Blue Sky. I'll see so much stuff from like the liberals whose like main issue is like Trump undermining democracy and becoming authoritarian, and also will say like American voters are just constitutionally inherently stupid idiots. You can't trust them. You have to talk to them like babies. There's like, we wanted this, we just, and it's like, okay, I see where you are coming from on both of these positions, but like they are not foundationally compatible, and at some point you are going to have to pick one over the other. You are going to have to either believe there is some way of talking to the people you want to have a role in running the country, or you are going to have to bite the bullet that they shouldn't be involved in running the country, and if so, decide who should be. Like,
And they're going to choose the same thing. They're going to choose the one big team.
Yeah, and
I mean, like,
anger,
don't even have that.
Anger and looking for someone to blame doesn't require ideological coherence.
Yeah, that's what I mean. That's what I mean by one big team.
yeah.
Wait, keep
I mean,
go
like,
on. I want to hear more about that.
I'm
Sorry.
eating Popeyes. No, just Angie
yeah.
talking about just like, oh, the difference between just like proper neoconservatism and like MAGA stuff, like, and just like further deeper darkness. But like, I don't know, all the energy is going to the same place. I don't really see the distinctions as meaningful. I really just there are the two directions, and again, that same liberal frustration is just going to go in the direction it wants to, and that's what it is.
I mean, like, the way I see it, like,
It's definitely important to understand and like map out the actual like stated theory of it. No, I'm not lagging on that, but I mean, money goes to the same place.
yeah, I mean, like, there is like a constitutive contradiction in like the entire concept of liberal democracy. Because, and you see that in play, I think, in, like, Viktor Orban, for instance, elevating the idea of democracy as above liberalism, or the thing where like half of the neo-fascist parties in Europe refer to themselves as like direct democracy parties. And a big part of that, I think, is, like, number one, like, you could see it as like you could see that latter bit as like a cynical ploy. You could see those as like cynical ploys. Where, like, for instance, like the invocation of direct democracy by these like far right parties in Europe is basically to the extent that they want to put immigration to a plebiscite because they're sure that like 51% of the population will say no more immigration if put to a poll. And then like and then Orban, for instance, invoking democracy means little more than like I won the election, therefore I get to do whatever I want. But then, like, there's deeper things there within the nature of democracy itself, where, does democracy mean, does the demos in democracy mean all the people or like the winning faction of the people? Does like that mean like 51% of the population has the right to just pummel the other 49% forever? Does it mean, if the people vote democracy away, that is a properly democratic expression? And part of it, I think, is, that when people say democracy, a lot of the time what they mean is liberal democracy. And the contradiction there is that liberalism's basic principle, as I see it, is the rule of law. And there's a bit of an uneasiness between the idea of like rule by the people and rule of law in some fashion,
Yes,
which is that like the ultimate conclusion of like the principle of liberalism being rule of law is not like, a system where everybody votes on everything, but rather a system where every single decision is adjudicated by like panels of judges and attorneys in accordance with like this ideal like constitution that aims to capture in full like the Platonic ideal of right.
Yeah, and any actual democratic function there is like, stated to be the trust in like the demos gradually refining that center document of law.
Yeah.
That doesn't really,
Like,
that hasn't happened in a while.
yeah, like I remember this being like actually a pretty big topic of discussion back in like 2015, when Obergefell versus Hodges, when the Obergefell versus Hodges decision
I've always
was
heard
published.
Obergefell. What the heck?
I always just heard Obergefell, but okay. I have no
Yeah.
idea.
No, I just
Obergefell.
had no idea.
Yeah, like when Obergefell v. Hodges was published, was ruled, I should say. There was a lot of controversy where, like, a large part of the conservative complaint was basically like, why are these judges legislating from the bench? Why is it that these judges can decide to foist gay marriage upon the American public when the American public did not vote on gay marriage, either directly or through like the proxy of congressional representation? And I remember the standard liberal response there, the standard pro-gay marriage response was like, gay marriage is a right. The right to marry who you love is a right. It should not be put to a vote. It should be something that is recognized as emanating from the most basic principles of law that we all uphold. And that, I think, is, sort of the constant. That, I think, right there is like the sort of weird contradiction in the idea of liberal democracy. Like, if we're going to say, like, questions of right should not be put to a vote, then at some point we're going to say that, like, the majority of politics is something that ought not be put to a vote, because so much of politics deals with questions of right. At that point, the only things that should be put to a vote are those things which determine how that right is to be implemented and managed.
But at that point, you are falling back very, very heavily on, like, one, like, wait, what is right? Like, we don't even have a common consensus either among the demos or among the, like, educated or legal classes on what that is, or what the basis, whether the basis being used in, like, the American Constitution is even still relevant or upheld today, etc. And two, like, at what point, like, lawyers, judges, etc. are still a distinct class of distinct people, like, who are making these, who are, to some extent, you're putting in the position of the state of exception here. Even if, yeah. So I do think that there's a level on which almost it feels less contradictory to me, in that I feel like theoretically it's supposed to be a loop. Like, each level of the contradiction within liberalism, articulated properly, can at least sort of be looped back into the other level, and you can be like, well, yes, this is why we have these different contradicting levels, because any one of these on its own will just get, like, good-hearted onto its form, basically.
Yeah.
The moment that you question one thing, then there's a prepared spot for the goalpost to move to on a circular track until it comes back around. It's like, like there's no like logical argument that diffuses the mindset.
Yeah,
I'm also thinking that we are getting back into, like, much more ancient topics than liberalism, too, insofar as, like, the rule of law as a value is one of that is common to, like, a lot of historical political systems. You could say, like, the Roman empire was, and actually this brings me back to watching Claudius again, where like I wouldn't even necessarily characterize the Roman Republic as liberal, but it was republican. It was like they distinguished that from democratic, but like relative to its historic, like it voted on things, and this was like overturned in a process that arguably made it a lot less lawful, but where once again every step of this ideologically was meant to be understood as upholding law, and they had to go through all these really, really elaborate, like, ritualistic technicalities to sort of legalize the empire.
Yeah, all while an army was just sitting camped outside of Rome saying, "Now, hurry up."
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I'm thinking here is, like, this is why, like, you know, the Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization was, like, kind of a shock to, like, a lot of liberals, is because, you know, like, that's like not like the first time in recent history, not like the first time in recent history, but rather like it represented like this sort of decisive idea of, like, you know, the Supreme Court can just overturn something that the Supreme Court said like 50 years ago. And a lot of critics of, like, the Democratic Party had been saying, like, you know, one of the things Biden should have done before like Trump came to office was, you know, try to codify Dobbs into congressional law. And that's very interesting because, like, it's sort of like the reverse of it's like kind of reverse of the argument that, like, the same people were often making about Obergefell, which is, you know, the idea that, like, one of the arguments in Obergefell, aside from, like, the specific, like, right-based argument, is the idea that, like, the Supreme Court decision is, like, inherently more stable because it is a declaration of basic right that is not something that can simply be revoked by Congress when, like, the other party gets control of it, like, you know, in 4 years' time.
Yeah. But yeah,
I don't know. Go ahead. Sorry.
That's just based on the stability of, you know, lifetime terms versus you know, an election cycle. And as we've seen, when you get to the point where, oh, actually the entire crop of justices are dying off within a decade, you know, then all that assumed stability stops existing.
I don't think I just don't think very many people have, like, a thoroughly reasoned standpoint on this. I don't think people are really logic gaming this out. Like, at this point in history, it really is just scrambling. I think on both sides or whatever, it is scrambling to get stuff in before the bell rings. You know what I mean?
But I mean, like,
I know. I think that's part of it too. Just like the actual, like, walking away from those kind of, like, reason out standpoints. But, like, I also don't know how much they all ever actually existed.
Yeah, and I mean, like, that's, like, ultimately part of the problem, which is, like, you know, at some point, like, you know, what we've seen, like, you know, over, like, the past, like, 8 years is, like, this bizarre morbid comedy where, like, Obama creates all this legislation and, like, leaves a legacy. And, like, the first thing that Trump sets out to do as soon as he gets into office is to undo all of Obama's legacy. And then the first thing that Biden sets out to do as soon as he gets into office is to put back in place all of Obama's legacy, and then Trump is back in office, and the first thing he sets out to do is undo all of Obama's legacy again.
And the pendulum gets a bit more erratic every time.
Yeah, and so the main thing that keeps it from being like a stable back and forth, like, not that even that would be a good thing, it very much wouldn't, but it is so much easier to dismantle an institution than it is to establish one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, like, the thing there is, like, you know, the sort of like that produces like a sort of, I'm not sure if it's like a novel critique of democracy as like a concept, but like there is a critique of democracy like implicit in like the comedy of that, where it's like, you know, at some point it just turns into like every 4 years, like the entire system of law is replaced.
Yeah, I bet someone could make a kind of movie in the style of kind of Everything Everywhere All at Once, and have these law changes, you know, but apply them to like the laws of reality, and have like gods kind of fight over what the laws of reality are going to be, and these just kind of switch, you know, every. Maybe not even 4 years. Maybe it just switches every year, or maybe even a shorter time frame than that.
Honestly, that would function very well as like a parody of like a Marvel or DC style multiverse.
Yeah. So I'd say it's less of a critique of like democracy proper, and more of the fact that right now the main motivating factor for the average voter is spite. And the more that politicians and the more that politicians are beholden to like capital and their own longevity in office than the interests of the people voting for them, the more those voters will feel, you know, jilted and spiteful, and therefore, you know, respond accordingly.
Well, this is where I will bring up TLP, Sadly Porn again, which is like half the book ends up not being about porn, it's about Thucydides, and the big argument he just like close reads all this stuff from Thucydides to be like, well, basically this is actually what was happening in Athens around like the time that it started declining and the time of the war with Sparta.
Yeah, no, that's when the book got really interesting. Once he starts kind of like going back there, now I'm realizing, oh, wait a second, he's not doing some very stupid. Okay, that's a little too aggressive, but not doing this kind of I don't know, diluted kind of like critique of like just some like, you know, lazy psychological subject. Right. It's not just that. Like it's framing this psychological subject within the kind of you know, within a republic where you are a citizen and you have responsibilities to your public. And insofar as you are unable to fulfill your responsibilities, you no longer, you know, have like the rights that you say you want to have. Like, you in effect don't have them anymore because you give them away.
Incidentally,
and maybe that's
yeah,
you can keep going.
I like how much that book reads like psychology as cosmic horror, but also that does feel like when I posted about Dark TLP, it's like that's a big part of the agenda of like Trump Vance right now is like, okay, you're going to like there's this increasingly explicit, I think, idea of like, actually, like, you see it in the RFK autism stuff, that like we're just going to start clawing back your rights proportionate to the responsibilities we think you aren't living up to.
Yes.
Yeah.
That is being done. Or at least that's the attempt.
Yeah, and then like a lot of these responsibilities are like very particular, like moral and metaphysical responsibilities that have nothing to do with your actual, like, not, I mean, in the productivity in the capitalist sense, even.
Right.
Like, you know,
which
like
has become kind of the telos of the state at this point.
Yeah.
Because also the state can't do anything without it.
Yeah. But like, you know, the responsibility that a trans person is not living up to is not, you know, a one that materially harms society, is one that, you know, violates a proposed social order.
Yeah.
And so by not,
the reproductive order.
Yeah.
At best, it's like
to be clear, I'm not defending that, but yeah.
Yeah.
It's about building the momentum.
Yeah, I just
the thing that frustrates me though is that like in my opinion it's just too late. It's just too late. So I to like make like kind of like America as a giant mass, a body of Republican citizens. I just don't see that happening.
I don't think that it's even
either.
not too late. They aren't trying. Like they
No,
are
they
sort
aren't,
of
they
like
aren't really trying. No,
it's
both too late and they're not really trying. They are kind of full of grifters.
Well,
I
yeah,
don't think it actually matters the actual state of things. What is the important part is like raising the standard of what that should look like. I don't think there is going to be an attempt to genuinely interface or like change the composition of the populace and these kind of things, like in terms of identity or whatever. It's just gonna get uglier and uglier, and I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't think it's a matter of policy anymore. I think it's getting to the point.
So the weird thing, so the thing is, it's that, you know, you can't just look at you know, the Republican Party or the current government or whatever as a monolithic entity with aligned goals, because there's a bunch of little sub factions that are all just basically pointing in one direction but kind of forking off. Like the pro-natalists and like the Gen AI truthers, you know, they don't have any common ground in their ideologies, but they're united under this movement.
Yeah, because it's all infighting, and when does infighting become urgent? You know what I mean? It won't become urgent until like the higher order goals are done with. Until then, it's just gonna ride.
Yeah.
I've been kind of wanting to say multiple things over the course of the past like 20 or 30 minutes or something, so I may as well go off of them in my head. We started out talking about like I already don't remember. I'm just too busy like focusing on like the references in my head. Something came up to do with occultism that reminded me of Kenneth Grant's Outside the Circles of Time. That topic is long gone though. And then we just moved on to blatantly referencing Giorgio Agamben's Homo Sacer, which I haven't thought about in like years. I looked up the term state of exception. It's like, wow, yeah, this is a reference I haven't touched in a long time. I started thinking about the concept of sovereignty and the threshold through which that becomes like, I don't know, I just had that in my mind and I didn't really know what to do with it. So that was like something else. I think that's like the most recent thing I was thinking about. I've kind of been sitting here like not really knowing like what or when to contribute.
Sorry.
It's fine.
I think it's interesting
which is the way I say it's fine is like it's not fine, but it is really fine. It is really fine that it's not fine. You know?
Yeah.
You threw me an invite. I joined the server and I get this.
Does anyone have anything they want to read first, or I could even go into my Jesus Christ Shaman King thing.
I'd be glad to.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, do you think that poem that I showed to you and Ceci, like last week, would be pretty good for
Oh, yeah,
this?
that's her name.
Hit it.
Oh,
Yeah.
sorry. All right. Shall I read it?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, to honor me, you wish, and I can, pardon me, I can show to you what really you can do, this that pleases me who can't be. I want you to take the desire path between the tall sunflowers to the place where I rest beneath the rotting tree branches, and sit there a while and ponder what you might have seen, what fun you might have had when small, and might and honor were concepts that to you were not so distant, muffled by the clang and hum of working life, drowned out by the moans and grunts of adult life, made mute by the bangs and drums of bloodied life, shot out by the blare and thrum. We hear too often among ourselves when a certain stillness creeps into our hearts that squeezes us in, mercy or not, and directs our gaze toward the tall sunflowers beside the desire path that leads to the rotting tree branches by the placid lake where the water does not ripple in the wind.
My mind at first was saying that's very Robert Frosty, and then I started thinking of Ambrose Bierce.
I'm admittedly very, like, a decade out from the last time I properly studied poetry. So I end up in this state where whenever I listen to poetry being read, where I try to see if I can identify the meter, and then when I fail to do that, I realize that I was listening to like the rhythm of the speech rather than the actual content of it.
Well, I mean, like, I did intend for the rhythm to be like a big part of this.
Yeah, no, like it was very distinctive, which is why I kind of zeroed in on it, but I failed to draw anything insightful, unfortunately.
One thing I know about poetry, specifically for Angie, and she knows this because I had a phase of like writing in meter, is that the form is the function, and that kind of sucks. That's it. That's all I've got to say, really. There's nothing else to expand on with that. The form is the function. It's the whole point.
So I put the text in the chat so that anybody can read how it's like presented visually.
Okay.
And of course, my own interpretation is only as valid as anybody else's. But what I was thinking was just like, this feels very ambiguous as to like where things stop and start.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of focus on decay.
Mm-hmm.
Which I guess, yeah, if we're talking about transitory states, you know, that's one of the most prominent ones in nature. But yeah, I am very much a layman when it comes to poetry. I remember like marveling at like Shakespeare in high school and be like, oh, I see. You just have these comic relief characters with no meter whatsoever to just throw the audience off.
Yeah.
Everyone says that, but also having been in like an actual poetry, like poetry classes in a creative writing program, and like knowing people who are like published award-winning like basically everyone is. Even the places where there is an actual sort of criterion of like unless you're sort of going out of your way to like educate yourself in it, it really is kind of fake because there's so little institutional like again I've probably told this story before, but in my first year creative writing poetry class, we were going to do 1 week on like scansion, on prosody, like the stresses in different lines. And I was hyped for that, even as someone who basically never writes in meter. And then the prof was just like, you know what? I think you're all going to be too bored by this, so we'll just skip it. Nobody had indicated this at all, and it never came up again. Like
that's ridiculous.
I can't remember where I learned scansion. I know I took it in high school, but I can't remember if it was in Latin or English class. But I thought that was it just learning like the notation system, or
if
what
you
was
had
it? So was it
Latin
actually
class,
looking...
What? That's if you had Latin class, one, that's really cool. Two, that's like that's already speaking to a system where you might be more likely to learn scansion somewhere.
Okay, never mind. I really just was asking, was it like
a Catholic
looking at
thing, isn't it?
Poems like directly with an eye to scansion, or if it was just like learning the basics?
Yeah, I mean, like one of the things that like you learn while trying to learn Latin is that like pretty much all writing in classical Latin and ancient Greek was dictated by like poetic convention.
Yes.
So like for instance, like the main distinction between rhetoric and poetry, for instance, was often held to be that poetry uses feet of 3 or fewer beats, whereas rhetoric uses feet of 4 and 5 beats.
I agree.
It's I do kind of like this. It's not so much poetry, but like when I write, I do kind of hyperfixate on the rhythm and flow of speech. Not so much in structuring the sentences, but like I'm someone who could rightfully be accused of overusing ellipses.
Because same actually.
Because like, you know, when I imagine somebody talking, you know, I get real into the details of like where are they pausing for emphasis or to like collect a thought, you know?
Same.
And
yeah, I mean like
and so basically when you're doing that with dialogue, your options are somewhat limited in terms of punctuation.
Mm-hmm.
There was something I wanted to say about Angie's poem, actually. I was like scratching, quietly, abstractly scratching my head, figuratively, whatever the fuck kind of combinations of words I just used mean. And I was realizing, oh, it reminds me of Christina Rossetti. Like, out of all the pre-Raphaelites, it reminds me like very specifically of her, like of the way that she writes, like children talking to each other in like Goblin Market, for example. And it's not like I see what you wrote as like coming from the perspective of like a child. I don't know. It could. It's more so that Christina Rossetti was able to capture in her poetry, like fitting speech, fitting natural speech into form, fitting natural speech into meter. Mm-hmm. That's what makes something like Goblin Market work to me. That's what enraptures me about her poetry, and I feel like you've nailed the same kind of thing here. I'm trying to remember if, like, I mentioned Ambrose Bierce earlier. I don't think that's the dude I'm thinking of.
Ambrose Bierce is the Devil's Dictionary dude.
Yeah, it is. No, I'm correct. He has poetry. He does have poetry. And if it's the series I'm thinking of, then it's...
Yeah, and I mean...
See. Yeah, it is. Yeah, I'm correct. Yeah. I was thinking, yeah. Yep.
Yeah, and I mean, like, my thought on like form is like, one of the interesting things is that like of course English is a stress timed language. Which means that, like, roughly speaking, a stressed syllable has the same length as, like, there is an equal distance in terms of time between stressed syllables. And you can listen to that, like, if you're listening to an accomplished orator speak, for instance.
Yeah.
And it bases its notions of meter upon, like, the stressed syllables, the syllables that are pronounced more strongly than other syllables. Whereas Greek and Latin poetry, Greek and Latin both have stress, but that's not the main thing for them. The main thing for them is like vowel length. And if you listen for instance, to like Sappho, for instance, like, you listen to that and it has a very different rhythm from English, like fainitai mokynosis theoisin emen oner otis enantios toi isdani kai plasion ditone sas ipakue, for instance. Like, that sounds very different in rhythm from like how English flows.
In tone, not spoken. That's how I see it.
Yeah.
The
and so, like,
of it.
Yeah, exactly. And so, like, and so when you look at English notions of meter, we lifted those kind of wholesale from Latin. We actually ended up, like, applying a large quantity of, like, Latin notions of grammar.
And oh god,
English.
do I love the internal losing battle of shoving English into it. I love it.
Yeah, I mean, like, there's like, the most interesting thing is, for instance, like, we hear the phrase passive voice used a lot, but there is no actual passive voice in English. What you're referring to is like a way of arranging words, whereas, like, passive voice, when you're talking about Latin, for instance, is an actual inflection. It is an actual feature of the word itself.
So this is where my lack of education in linguistic linguistic history gets slightly made up for by my slightly better education in music history, because because if you imagine sung lyrics as just poetry set to paired with specific vocal tones, like
yes,
yeah,
this is what I was getting at with intonation. There's a direct they were songs, lyric poetry.
Speaking of, I while we've been on this call, I do have 5 Tanka written out. When we're ready, let me know.
Nice.
I'm ready. I am ready.
Let me just pick. I don't have the lucky star.
No, I got it this time. Gabe, listen.
Perfect. Okay.
Ready?
Yeah.
All right. Let me psych myself up a little bit. Okay. Get a little night on flower meadow carpet. Now the bridge is broke. Fat sun like a sinking ship becomes the window light.
Did you just cut?
Shutters shine and snap on clouds half blue, half scarlet. White blade lower slopes. Those lovers twined below me and rowdy crowd around me.
Oh my goodness.
Vetiver and glass tracks across the wingspan of wicker shoulder blade. In the blossom of my youth, already red lines meet me. I curl up my arm towards cobalt horizon as the summer green. Rainbows stay and wait for me at silhouetted tree line. Meet me at the height where ruby melts to ashes. Thus you promised me. Carrying spoils and shell string, I wait and watch fire fading. Yay, that's it.
Wow.
I love these. Haha.
I'm always really curious what. Yeah.
Really good. You should record those because your noise suppression on your microphone was fragmenting
how bad?
Basically, whatever you held.
That's why we kept bursting in.
Oh, sorry, I didn't realize.
Whatever you
It's
held,
okay.
whatever you held the higher tone.
Oh, that's a shame.
It tended to eat the middle of the word.
Oh, that's a shame. That's crazy. Man, okay, I'll turn it off next time. My bad.
Oh, who's that? Who's that under the? Who's that? Who could that be? Who could that be? Oh, is it?
Oh my god, I thought that was me.
Oh, that's a big cat.
The hunter. Oh my gosh.
That looked like a surveillance camera for a moment.
Yeah. I have a new kitten, but he is currently outside because he doesn't know that headset cables are not food. So
happens to the best of us.
My cats don't know that plastic isn't food.
So yeah,
it's our fault, not theirs.
New kitten doesn't get to sit in on voice chat, unfortunately.
I should ask, by the way, Ceci, what was the form that you wrote those in again?
Oh, just Tanka.
I'm not familiar.
I've just been going off Yakunin issue. I've been getting into it.
It's like the other Japanese, like I'd say like the more significant culturally within Japan than haiku form, but the other one that you will occasionally see like just sort of translated into a syllable pattern in Western education. Which
which is part of it, but
than,
essentially, long story short, it's read in that rhythm I just did, and it's split in basically two component poems: the first 3 lines and the last 2 lines, which is 5-7-5 like haiku for the first 2, and then 7-7 for the second 2. And like the whole thing is a play between those 2 halves. But I've never really messed with haiku. I don't really know that specific side of it.
Yeah. I mean, like
it's just that the manner of presentation you gave it was what really struck me, because I didn't hear you clarifying what it was at first, and I assumed it was the other side of Asia. I assumed it was like something taken from like it just struck me as Indian at first. I don't know.
I can see it. That kind of lilt.
Yeah. I mean,
going off of the base assumption of like anything with a sustained tone has something to do with ragas inherently.
Yeah, I'm just thinking.
It's funny because I of course my very Eurocentric education was I'm just thinking okay I've done Gregorian chants in choir.
that's another point of comparison. I mean, this is my this is something I'm very nerdy about, but probably the exemplary person, the figure that I think of when it comes to the meeting point of all these together, where you just have the abstract concept of a drone, is Lamonte Young. He was able to identify the commonalities between Gregorian chant and plainsong in general, in ragas, in Japanese court music, gagaku specifically. That's the name it goes by. Yeah, he was able to identify those traits and all of that, and that's why he invented drone music.
One thing that I think about with regards to like Western understanding of like Japanese poetry is like with regard to haiku specifically, a lot of people don't understand that like haiku is like way more restricted than just like a 5-7-5 pattern.
Yes, it's like a dedicated little pun. They're hard. I don't like them.
Yeah,
also,
you have to
missing like massive pillars of cultural and social context in which they exist that weren't just like, uniform, because like a lot of the things that we go like, oh, this is just like a nice nature poem about like what if grass was wet, is actually like this 8-tier reference to some like a court Buddhist thing referencing another poem and shit.
Yeah, like the weird thing is that when poetry in, you know, European tradition gets short, it's usually because it is unserious.
Yeah.
Like limericks are a low art form.
Limericks are very serious.
I do
like in terms of the artistic snobbery.
I'm being silly.
Yeah. I do have a counterpoint to that, but first I want to mention, like, you know, haiku really does like require like a kireji, the cutting word, and like the seasonal reference is the last line. There are most of what we refer to as haiku in like the US, for instance, and the West, the Anglo sphere more broadly, is actually senryu, which is, and senryu, for the record, are mostly about just like human themes rather than nature themes, as haiku are mostly about nature themes. Senryu are often like very much like, you know, short poems in the West, where like senryu are often very like darkly humorous. There is actually a competition to create there are actually competitions to create senryu, including like the most cat-like senryu, and one of the winning entries is one of my favorite, which goes like ningen wa wagahai yo no isu de aru, which means humanity to my illustrious self is nothing but chairs.
Perfect.
But I was about to mention, like, you know, the most similar thing to like the way that Japanese poetry particularly works that I can think of in the West is actually Welsh poetry.
Like, that makes a lot of sense to me intuitively, but go on.
Like, Welsh has like all of these rules. Well, it has all of these rules. It has a quantitative meter, unlike English, which has qualitative meter. That's the thing I was about to mention, by the way, is like, you know, in contrast to like, you know, the quantitative meter of Japanese poetry or Latin or Greek poetry, like, you know, you listen to like really old English poetry, for instance, like Beowulf, for instance. What we gardenan yardagum, theod kininga, fringe frunon, husa athlingas elin fremedon, for instance. Like that has a sort of resonance that feels much more like natural English speech.
Yeah, you have, if I may butt in, you have the speculation that opening to Beowulf is to draw listeners in. You have the speculation that that's to get people's attention.
It's a transcription of oral tradition. So
yeah, exactly. I mean, like I mean, like, Greek and Latin poetry are also transcriptions of oral tradition, but, like, you know, the way that Greek and Latin are spoken is just very different from, like, the way that English is spoken. And Welsh is more quantitative as well, is the thing. It lends itself to quantitative meters. And if you listen, and one of my favorites is, like, the idea of the Anglen, which is a traditional Welsh short poem, which has quantitative meter. It has very strict limits of syllables and very rigid patterns of rhyme and half rhyme, as well as specific repeating patterns of consonants and accents. So it's extremely strict in how it's composed. And here's, like, for instance, an Anglen that is found on a gravestone in a town in Wales. And I think that the word price might be pronounced as in English here. Price anwyl, pur ai wasanaeth diwyd. Ang ai wabadaeth. Goro aspri, fria fraith, a thrwydal mewn athrawiaeth. And that means, dear price, pure in its diligent service, wide in his knowledge, a man acerbic, fearless and fluent, and thorough in doctrine. And that's sort of, that's like just, I think, a dedication to a priest or a deacon in the Anglican Church. And I think that one is supposed to be an Anglen inodal union, or a straight one-rhymed Anglen, which has 4 lines of 10, 6, 7, and 7 syllables. The 7th, 8th, or 9th syllable of the first line introduces the rhyme, and this is repeated on the last syllable of the other 3 lines. The part of the first line after the rhyme alliterates with the first part of the second line.
Oh my god.
So it's very involved.
I respect it.
Yeah, in how it must be written.
Yeah, just trying to get anything to fit that.
Yeah, Robert Graves actually attempted to write Anglens in English. So, for instance,
yes, please.
One of his juvenile poems, titled "A Pot of White Heather," goes, "Thou, a poor woman's faring, white heather, witherest from the ending of summer's bliss to the sting of winter's gray beginning."
That's amazing. Holy fuck, that's so good.
So, what does juvenile mean in this context?
Juvenile,
it means,
like
yeah,
written before a mature period, like what a scholar would say about a writer or an author.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so like kind of
early
like,
works,
where somebody would say sophomore.
Yes.
Kind of.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And like, here's like another example, which is like, you know, a prayer of grace before a meal. Odad an daily dedwydd. A diolch o newydd. Cans oth law I daw bob dydd. Yn lluniaeth an llawanydd. And that translates to, "O Father, as a happy family, we come with thanks anew, for from your hand comes every day our sustenance and our joy." But if you notice, like, the specific forms, for instance, like in the first line you have dad and dedwydd, the D accent is repeated. A diolch o newydd, in dawn and diolch, the D accent is again repeated. Lao and Dao rhyme in the third line. Dao and Did have like the alliteration. That's the Kanghanedd. And then like in the very end you have like Ein Lluniaeth and An Llawanydd. The Ll accent is repeated there. And you also notice like the rhymes and half rhymes. Deddwydd, newydd, newydd, dewydd, newydd, Dave, Bob, Dave, and Llawenydd, for instance.
I feel like that's another quirk of English, just not equipped to like think about rhymes at all outside of endings of lines. There's just no context for recognizing that.
Yeah. I mean, that's like just like
I don't know, because I don't think that's quite true, because whenever people will accidentally rhyme in the middle of a sentence a lot, and it'll always take them out of the sentence because they immediately catch it.
Also, rap rhyme schemes have gotten like way more complex, even compared to like historical English poetry.
That feels like alliteration does. You know what I mean?
Yes,
like that
true.
kind of snappiness feels like
Right.
alliteration stuff where it's meant
rhyme
to be read
as
in sequence.
a lot of
But I just mean like matching rhymes specifically at like specific points in line besides the end, and less about like the sequence.
Okay. I did want to ask before we got too far off, about your like just how you write these, because like, I mean, obviously to some extent it's just magic, but like what the magic phenomenologically works like, because it is like, I can tell they're written very differently than how I'd write, or how I maybe could write. The reason I rarely do meter myself is that like I am just sort of like optimizing for image, and like it's content first rather than form first most of the time, and I have to find the content in like the moment, and then I can't fuck around with it too much once I have it.
In my own writing, okay, like if you're going the content versus form, I guess, like this is why I can't write without meter, because if I like stumble upon a good image that I like, or like a good turn of phrase, I'm like, wow, this is really just like words, that this is prose. If I find a meter it can fit in, if I find like a place it's snappier, if I can phrase it in a different way where like I like the stress of it more, then it works way better. And that's if I need to like cut words, if I need to rearrange things, if I need to like stretch it to fit the meter, all the better. But yeah, that's why every time I've tried to write free verse, I've tried a lot, but I'm just like, wow, I'm just like, I don't have anywhere to dig my heels in. You know what I mean? I don't have like any points I'm making without like not so much the meter itself as like, oh, like when those points of content I like happen in the meter. You know what I mean? Like, oh, is it like a cool intro to the line? Is it the punchy ending of it? Is it like that kind of like tonality to where it falls in the meter is like a lot of what gives content its form to me.
Yeah, and I can see that, like, in also how, because, like, you have a lot of, like, good images and word combinations, but a lot of the time, what makes them work is just how they're juxtaposed in context, and, like, the form of the full... Like, the Tanka format is, first and foremost, it's a structure of relations more than... like even just a structure of math or sort of like
and
repetitions.
that's another thing. I guess if I can go into this process of Tanka specifically, I really like them as sentences. That's why I like to post them here, just like you get like the syntax and punctuation of it. I really like imagining them like being like literally spoken because he's saying them, but like as part of a discussion almost. I don't know. I definitely err on like, oh, I'm going to ask a question to an object or a location. Like I think I rely on that too much.
That's a really good framing, actually. I like that.
Again, I think that's my default thing with these.
Yeah,
like
I was describing mine, so yeah.
Talking to the rower, talking to the shutter, talking to the rainbow in these, you know what I mean? I like naming things and like pointing out something in the distance and speaking to that.
Actually,
and again, a lot of that is just riffing on the 100 Poets. There's a lot of that there.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the 100 Poets is like, oh, notice the cool moment, or like questioning the mountain, or
Yeah.
like single musing to oneself about like a feeling. You know what I mean?
That is what I was trying to like the how the content determination happens, and it's often it's something that takes place. Like I'll get the original phrase in the context of a conversation with myself, or a sort of like just a line of thought, and be like, okay, I can't work this. This doesn't belong in any like long externally determined form like an essay or like a story or anything. There's no sort of like causally linked place for it. But if I like over the course of the chain of thought can find enough other points that like connect to or build on this, and sometimes that'll happen over like a week or a month even, like I will build a thing for this to live in that like that will have some permanence it would not have otherwise had, and will give it some context that is like suited uniquely to itself and all the other things that find their way into that context.
That's an interesting thing, because that is like a true like a content first approach, and like finding form after that. But when you mentioned just like form versus content, I was thinking to myself like, oh yeah, of course I start with content. Of course you have to start with content. You know what I mean? Like you have to know
Yeah.
what you want to write before you start it. But I don't. That's not actually true for me. I think like when I get in a groove of writing these or thinking about these a lot, or like when I'm working on Sword Song and just I'm thinking about 14ers all the time, just like I do kind of cycle that meter and cadence through my head. Again, just like almost humming that cadence to myself, and just like the words just popping into existence based on
Yeah.
that. Like, oh, like what cool thing could I say along that cadence? You know what I mean? I have the
Yeah.
cadence, I have the circuit running. So like, oh, I can start with like one little point that would be a nice flourish on the third line or something. And like just like working out sentences from that structure. And then, of course, as the poem actually builds itself out, I can go like, oh, that original moment I liked in this doesn't fit, but I can like switch it around a little bit. I think Tanka are pretty easy when you're doing a lot in a row. When you look back at them, you're like, oh, I can actually move that upper poem and work better with this lower poem and like cut them up like that. I don't know. A lot of it does come from just like the guard lines for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. I do have something to contribute myself, though it will need a little preamble and context here.
Go for it.
Uh, to kind of, because yeah, we've been talking a lot about meter and structure, and so what I'm going to do instead is go full reverse and go all the way to what like a hypothetical of what could qualify as poetry in a non-linguistic setting, let's say. So if you've heard me talk about my my xenofiction novel before, the kind of central supernatural conceit of it is a means of communication through pure intent. So if you do take some sort of action with the intent to communicate a idea or concept, then it will get across. So in that sense, the whole thing with poetry being, the ordered structure of sounds and language being a giving a form to the art doesn't or can't apply. At least not outside of very specific narrow contexts. So what you get, what I kind of came up with instead is kind of poetry kind of that creates a sort of unreal, like an abstract kind of feeling through intentional ambiguity, let's say, where you would have an idea, a concept, but then like or a phrase, and at the end of that you intentionally express an ambiguity such that multiple different concepts could fit there. And what this this is very if I were to read this, I'm not sure how well it would read out loud, because it is very much like a textual thing. Like
go for it anyway. We'll
yeah,
see how
okay.
that.
Yeah, because like I have these like those ambiguities are notated with like brackets and
Yeah, worst comes worst, just post
yeah.
in chat and we can follow along with it.
Yeah, okay. So all right, here. Let me screenshot this.
You know it's good when it's not going to be presented in plain text.
I mean, it is technically in plain text, but like
it has an arrangement that's not possible with Discord. With this specific.
I have to fudge it a bit to read it out loud. Is basically the issue. Okay. So.
I see what you're getting at here.
Yeah. Okay. So. This is I stood among my peers as we scrutinized the world, and the world became known/discovered. I stood among the trees as I scrutinized the forest, and the forest became detailed/complex. But I stand among the blades of grass as I scrutinize the soil, and the soil becomes only endless/empty/beyond comprehension. The more specific and granular the examination becomes, the less worthwhile and usable knowledge I find. Why do we live/think/understand/exist? The beacons are the means. Our gifts are the means. Our wills/minds are the means. All of them/some of them/none of them are the means. The deeper I delve, the less conclusion/reality/truth emerges. But that is why I learn. I must broaden/extend the small, expose it to a macroscopic/loose/wide view. But I do not know how. And it's like very, yeah. So it's like it's definitely supposed to be like, oh, this is not a human did not like. I mean, technically, a human did create it because I wrote it, but you know,
narrative wise, yeah.
yeah. It's just a, this was written on a piece of paper.
I do really like this as a very classic example of like literary hypertext. You're not just facing like a text as an object, you're facing like something with multiple ends.
Yeah.
So in context, just what do the brackets signify? Like, is it a specific mode of thought?
It is they signify one of two things. If it's one of the ones where it's like split up with forward slashes, it's a deliberate ambiguity. Like these are from the perspective of the human point of view characters reading it, like the words that kind of get filled in there are like the close enoughs to what
it's like actual translation notes.
what multiple concepts. Yeah, but sometimes, like, so it's like a direct translation, but sometimes you get things where it is deliberately set up so that different, completely contradictory, mutually exclusive things could fill that sentence, and that is the intent. like
Yeah,
that.
I do like those parts the best, like the endless slash empty or the broad and extend. When the two like do have like an actual like less contradiction, but like more fundamental difference in their form. I do like those.
Yeah, like this.
Yeah.
Like this is very much a. I haven't really attempted this yet. Again, later in the, I haven't attempted this in a more developed form. This was very much a I am experimenting early on in this book kind of
I think it is
energy.
already a very well structured, well articulated form that's like simple and loose enough that you can do a lot of things with it and like recognizable. That's a thing that I think form in science fiction lends itself to. I like Delaney thinks a lot about science fiction as kind of generative of formal and linguistic possibilities, which is like one of the places I find his thinking about writing so useful. Um, but like you also I have a similar, for instance, problem in some ways in Mercenary Planet where there's several different languages and I'm always sort of just almost like putting little annotations into the text, which Leona, being an academic, she would like care to include, a former academic, she would care to include, where like the word that they're using that I'm writing this way just is actually way more complicated in this whole bunch of ways. But the Weir language in particular, because they're just like aliens that they tend to like brain symbiose and share thoughts directly with hosts. So they don't they can almost adapt themselves like naturally to the language of whatever mind they're working with, but there's less of a need for that. That's why like most of the planet names and place and character names are just sort of human words because they have, which was a thing that Asher put in the original world building notes, and then as soon as I got to it, I was like, wait, I would almost rather be making up like weird sounds, and because I would expect a word to have too little transferable context to be like sort of to even have the same reference for words as on Earth. But because the Weirs are constantly symbiosing with different species, they have a whole sort of art form of like these poetic concept to concept translations, basically. And because they're mostly not communicating in a form with a specific physical sign, they tend to use concepts to communicate things rather than proper names, while the Ahasurunu have this language that is like an exhaustive systematic cataloging system that can go down to a proper name on almost anything as well as several other semantic levels.
Polyvocality.
Yeah. See,
but all those things also let me be a bit lazy with what words I actually use because that's just one variable and I'm manipulating so many other variables at the same time, which you kind of have to do in sci-fi.
I think my first impression of it is that it just makes me think of linguistic relativity.
Yeah. Delaney also wrote Babel 17. So that's one of his like recurring concepts.
Yeah. So
like
go ahead. Sorry.
The fusion of the concepts, like more specific and granular, and like detailed / complex, and for instance, kind of. Well, it reminds me of two things. First of all, it reminds me a bit of Toki Pona, where like there's a very, very limited number of root words and a very limited number of like words that can be constructed from those roots. And so like it's intended as a language to encourage like a sort of zen of speaking. And it also reminds me a little of the Piraha language, which is a natural language that is very phonologically simple and allegedly uniquely among pretty much all languages does not contain recursion as an essential element of it. And it's like the main anthropologists who study it, including Daniel Everett, are like extremely controversial among they're extremely controversial among linguists because like it seems to invalidate the basic assumption of Chomskyan linguistics, which is that, you know, like all language is at some point based on recursion as a feature. There's so like Daniel Everett is a very fascinating guy because he had gone to contact the Piraha people as a missionary initially. He was like, all right, so I have to teach this uncontacted group of people about Jesus. But when he went to talk to the Piraha and he like started learning their language, he was trying to figure out like, so okay, how do I tell them about Jesus? How do I tell them about God? And so their response. So he was like, okay, so here's the thing, I have to tell you about Jesus. And they're like, oh yeah, I'm really excited to hear about this. We think this guy sounds cool, potentially. And so he's like, so Jesus was this guy who lived very long ago. And he immediately encountered a snag here because, like, Piraha, according to his descriptions, does not have, like, it doesn't really have words for, like, thousands or hundreds or really anything except for, like, 1, 2, and, like, a big amount. And so he had to say, like, okay, so Jesus lived a large volume of time ago. And he was God. And
I love this anecdote.
He and they were like, great, so when can we meet him? And they were like, and he was like, well, you don't really meet him in the way of, like, you know, he appears to you. I can't just, like, bring him in a boat to you. And they're like, oh, okay, so, like, your brother knows him, right? And he's like, well, no, my brother doesn't really know him. And then they're like, well, why do I care then?
That's beautiful. That's beautiful.
So
can you share the source for that? I really want to remember that for the future.
The guy's name is Daniel Everett.
Thank you. That's so great.
So
yeah. So like
thank you. Yeah, I found him.
Yeah, so Daniel Everett had gone to them attempting to teach them about Jesus, to convert them to Christianity, but ended up like becoming so profoundly influenced by their way of thinking that he just stopped being a Christian himself. Because he was like, when confronted with a people who, at least according to him, really did just have no concept of like relations extending further back than grandfathers, or like periods of time that can be quantified in any in any capability other than like now or tomorrow or a while ago, basically. Like, how do you fit like the entire concept of like, classical theism in there?
Yeah, like you can't preach about eternity because
Yeah.
that's not a thing.
It's also very
here's an
funny to me when you.
Sorry, this yeah.
It's also very funny when you remember that like Jesus is always considered as having descended from the Davidic line. Davidic. Never pronounced it out loud. Yeah, it's just very funny, like considering that because he is regarded as having come from like he wasn't created in a vacuum. Although, the Catholic faith kind of presumes that the Immaculate Conception is kind of something that happened in a holy vacuum.
This is going to be a really fun segue to my thing, and I was debating actually internally whether I should do
there were poems I really wanted to talk about. I think
going.
I'll talk about them with I'll talk about them with Angie because here's the thing, I'm very economic with time, which is a very Western thing of me. I'm unapologetic about it. I'm scared of death, so to speak. I'll just save the stuff I wanted to talk about with Angie later, I think.
I do have one little addendum, because when you were talking about names in Mercenary Planet and like the linguistic weirdness, I did actually go and pull up. So back when I was serializing my book on cohost.org, rest in peace.
That was the best attempt at I never found out there was drama about it, but like
they just ran out of money.
Yeah,
and the staff was burnt out because they couldn't hire any more people.
That's so funny.
But
you know what? That's a use case for the sort of like non-monetary coordination platform I'm trying to figure out how to develop.
Yeah.
Wasn't the co-host thing also like the guy who funded it like was completely MIA or something?
So he was deliberately like they had basically an anonymous angel donor who they lost contact with for a number of months, but they did eventually reestablish contact and like had a revenue stream that could pay for them and only them for a certain number of months, and the small development team just completely burnt out and called it.
That sucks.
Yeah, but anyway, so when I was serializing my book on there, I had an open ask box, and I would occasionally, and it said that I would field questions, and thankfully I have archived all those questions and answers because technically these are, world building. It is technically a world building document, just in Q&A form. And
that's
one
what
person
has.
Yeah. And one person had asked if two animals have the same name, is telling which one somebody is talking about trivial or complex? And so I just have 2 paragraphs of answer here that I think are interesting, given what you talked about with like names and what like the fact that they're just simple words. So my answer was, it depends. Technically, names are layered meaning. The exact meaning of a name is informed by the context in which it's used. For example, Transporter Steady Step is the name of the horse that carried our group of unlucky humans to the city, but a fuller or more complete name would technically be a/the/this transporter with steady steps. However, we are reading and writing this story in a language, and our human cast is thinking in one. Languages are concerned with things like length and readability, so it's prudent to abstract it for ours/the character's benefit, so long as the meaning remains relatively unchanged. But you can note the ambiguity on the full name. Steady Step could be the only one of its name, or it could be one of many. This is by design. If 2 creatures sharing a name are together, or being deliberately referred to in the same discussion, the context alters meanings enough to make referring to that one trivial. However, there is utility in being ambiguous. If one is aware of a group of people with the same name, then they can use the name to refer to any non-specific one of them, or even the group as a collective. Some, mainly those organized as some shared labor or goal, will choose the same name for themselves as a philosophical statement on the unity of their shared efforts and ideals. Each member speaks for all of their name, and their actions likewise reflect on them all.
Wow. Actually, just gonna double back on a political tangent from earlier, because I did want to, like, avoid sounding like a Straussian and explain what I meant about the whole responsibility thing, which I wasn't defending. But, like, that's like the image of democracy presented in, like, in Athens or, say, Rousseau, is just a group of people forming a spontaneous social contract to be represented as one name or one body in some particular set of circumstances.
That is so scary in its own way.
Like, part of the reason, like, and all those different just sort of, like, pacts of reciprocity, like, almost the pact as the founding political act rather than the random act of sovereignty that breaks it. And the reason, like, all sort of anxieties about that get territorialized onto, like, either productivity for capitalism or reproductive labor is that those are basically the only spheres in which we have left any of those working for just, like, basic survival level reasons. Like, we could, like, if you talk about the idea of, like, civic virtue or citizenship, like, the implicit responsibility from the liberal perspective is largely supposed to be tied to civic participation, but civic participation itself has been left with so little power. Like, the people making that argument mainly want to reduce it to just voting every 4 years between candidates who are picked entirely independently of you. And the people who want to participate beyond that extent have to do so by being an inconvenience to the system. Like, that's the mode of activism that has been left since the 60s. And so there's this thing where simultaneously, like, you can have no responsibilities, and there's or like, you can have political positions that are basically without responsibilities because they're basically without rights, and still become intense sites of resentment for being without responsibilities, while the people who have allocated themselves the entirety of the responsibilities simultaneously secretly resent it. And the more that is centralized in a society, the more that society, like, comes to resent the people it is excluding in its own structures.
Huh. Yep.
Yeah, and I was just thinking, like, there is an interesting point of difference between, like, the roughly continental theorizing of democracy, as in Rousseau, where the idea is that, like, the democratic state is the embodiment of the general will of the citizenry, with, like, the more agonistic idea of, like, the Scottish Enlightenment and British thinkers more generally, where it's not so much the state incarnates the general will, but, like, the state is like an instrument that mediates the various conflicting wills of each individual participant in society.
Although to some extent these are the same at different moments, because you need someone to decide, like, you need everybody to agree on resolving conflicts in a specific way within the state.
Sure.
Yeah.
But it's also like, like I think like based on like the imagery in my head, what I'm looking at is like the continental model, like just the way I visualize it is the continental model views the state, the democratic state, as like the Rousseau model kind of views the democratic state as a single block. Like you take all of like these particles, of iron that where each individual is an individual particle, and the formation of the democratic state is the smelting of all these particles into a single unified block. Whereas like the British model, like, the sort of like Locke model is more along the lines of like each individual particle is not smelted into one block, but is just kind of in an agitated state, and the function of the state is not to smelt them into one block, but to prevent them from basically just to prevent them from like forming into opposing blocks that create friction between each other that becomes excessive to the maintenance of the system as a whole.
Yeah. To be clear, I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just trying to square how, because I was using that, I was equating that Rousseau model with a thing that TLP describes, who is also somebody who says, like, when you're singing in a church choir and you start feeling like you're melting into the community and you're one with everyone there, I never feel like that. I am alone.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes, like, pretty rarely, but it's never really on the rational level either. But I don't know. Like, when you're a couple drinks in at the bar, you know what I mean? You're like, oh,
yeah,
nice. That kind of
the
thing.
MDMA feeling.
That was the most relatable part of that book, by the way.
Yeah.
Yes. I'm like, wow, I'm not the only one. But yeah, it's yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like, there's the thing, I think, is like, this also kind of relates to, like, Dugin's distinction between, like, thalassocracy and telerocracy, where, like, that idea of democracy as, like, the general will is more compatible with, like, this sort of, like, land consolidation view of existence, whereas, like, the idea of democracy as like competing wills agreeing to not like start killing each other is much more compatible with like this sort of like maritime diffusion understanding of existence, where like the maritime diffusion understanding views like that sort of like melting into each other as like basically abhorrent. Like that's like why like Anglo philosophy traditionally regards like a lot of like Hegelianism and whatnot, things like that, Rousseau and Hegel and whatnot, as basically like fascist in kernel, if not in full expression.
Yeah,
because like it's identifying, because it's looking at like the state of melting into another and feeling of like pure oneness and brotherhood, and says that is like the one single necessary ingredient for every Holocaust.
I mean, in the Canadian poli-sci establishment, like the way they teach poli-sci at U of T, that is the central opposition of all modern political philosophy, and it is mapped directly to a split between continental and like Anglophone ideology. But the thing I was talking about, I think I'm trying to get at the idea of something like prior to or sublating this opposition, because the way TLP articulates it, it's like the only sort of Lacanian that way to have like a valid intersubjective state between people operating as individuals is for them to make binding decisions on responsibilities as individuals to each other. And that's the whole sort of the form of the political arrangement in this framing, regardless of which of those you're doing.
You literally just described the local political system that I write about in my book. Like, yeah, okay, yeah. So no wonder you got that off of just the way I described like the naming philosophy, because it is.
Yeah,
I think somebody much more better educated than I am basically looked at what I had written and described it as a consensus-based anarchist collective.
Yeah.
In which like binding consensuses are made between groups of individuals that are only binding to those participating in that consensus.
I always found this characterization, this kind of immediate characterization of this kind of Rousseauistic Hegelian conception. It's like to go straight for the F word. I always found that very disingenuous and a kind of cop out. I think this horror at this kind of phenomenon. I saw it, expressed by someone I'd call like a right wing figure that did not, go straight for the F word. It was Wyndham Lewis did that.
yeah.
He did it. He's done it. He's done it in several books. But he finds different ways to kind of express this horror in each of his books. But at least in Time in Western Man, it comes in the form of this very ooey gooey modernistic writing that it includes a lot of references to kind of like the immediate experience of time and the kind of meshing with others in this kind of like into this kind of indistinct kind of pool that kind of happens, and how that kind of gets reflected in these writings. And of course he does not like that, as like a modernist. um but he doesn't frame his opposition as like, oh, this is fascist, oh, I hate this because it's fascist. No, he just straightforwardly says, like, I'm an artist, I like this kind of classical, very clean conception of art where objects are just, discrete, they're concrete, you can you can see them with your eyes, you can and you can kind of produce and reproduce them, according to according to like a conscious plan. And and this kind of, this subjectivity reflected in this kind of modernistic literature and art is, a deviation from that. And I don't like that.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah, I
think
mean, like,
so I think there are ways to express both support and horror at this phenomenon in a way that doesn't just like, immediately go toward caricature. Right.
Yeah, I mean, like, I don't mean to like explicitly say like Rousseau is Hitler or anything.
No,
Like,
I'm not talking about you.
Yeah.
What you're saying on this matter.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like I have a very I have a very complicated relationship with that kind of that conception of I guess, subjectivity, and how it gets kind of appealed to by various different actors with very different kind of end goals, right? But
yeah.
yeah,
I mean, like,
yeah.
I mean, like the collective effervescence stuff does remind me of like a couple of things. Like, like you mentioned, like mentioning like the church choir is like a specific example. Like, I mean, one of the, I guess like one of the big distinctions within like Christianity, especially, I think, like the way that it's practiced is like, you see that most often in like charismatic evangelical churches. Like fiery preaching and like shouting and loud singing and like these like contemporary worship songs that are supposed to like create sort of a mood of like overwhelmingness and like almost like physical exhaustion, and like a big part of like the quote unquote high church criticism is that like like you can kind of draw like a dividing line between churches that make this the central experience and churches that don't. And like the quote unquote high church criticism of this is basically, this isn't like real spirituality. This is drunkenness. This is like excess. And it's probably opening you up to, and like depending on like the which high church it is that you're talking about, like it's either like, it's probably opening you up to demons, or it's like, or it's like, it's like deluding you into thinking that your own subjective experience is like a real like working through of God. And then like the response to this from like, the quote unquote low churches, like the charismatic and Pentecostal churches themselves, is like, it's not that we're drunk. It's that it's not that we're drunk, it's that you're dead. You don't have this feeling. You don't produce this feeling because you have lost touch with the Holy Spirit. You haven't figured out how to call him back into your lives. And as a result, your churches are hemorrhaging because you don't preach a complete gospel. You're preaching a gospel that is like, Jesus died a long time ago, and that's not really relevant to the here and now. And I remember being like raised in one of these very low churches that had like a big emphasis on like, the big bombastic, loud like worship songs and like the slain in the spirit experience and like babbling in tongues and whatnot.
This is also what Catholicism and Orthodoxy are to all the new like aesthetic converts.
I grew up in a kind of church that was kind of a I don't know where it would rank exactly. I would say it's probably more low church, but not like the most extreme form of it. I went to like a Methodist church, which I would guess is, on the low side, but not exactly. It's not.
I'd say
it wasn't as
Methodist would be.
extreme.
I would expect
It wasn't
to be
as
high
extreme
church.
as say your typical as like some evangelical churches that I've kind of seen like talked about. Like, yes, there's music. Yes, there's a lot of subjective appeals to subjective experiences with God, but it never went the whole. I would never call it drunken. Like, it definitely doesn't go that far.
I mean, like, there's like one of the historical things is that like, like Wesley himself was reacting to a perceived lack of like influence of the Holy Spirit in like the Church of England when he founded the Methodist Church. And so the Methodist Church's like main idea was like, you know, the fruit of the Holy Spirit is like sober virtue, really. Like you can tell that a congregation is imbued with the Holy Spirit when they're like abstaining from sin and constantly going out into the world to like try to get rid of like suffering and bad things.
Okay, yeah,
and then like you know,
it was definitely in there. Yeah,
yeah, and like, you know, the contrast is like, you know, like Pentecostal theology, a lot of it originates from Methodist theology, but the difference is like, you know, like Pentecostal theology like comes in and says, well, like the fruit of the Holy Spirit, like, you know, like the outward good works may be a nice thing, but like that's not essential. The essential thing is, you know, like the very personal, extremely private like communication between like the Holy Spirit and the individual believer. And that can only really be ascertained with like, you know, the visible signs of the Spirit, like the speaking in tongues and whatnot. Because after all, like, you know, like healing the sick and speaking in tongues are like things that are like directly mentioned in the New Testament as like the signs of like the truly converted believer. And there's like the interesting thing is like, you know, that sort of lends itself to like that sort of like collective ecstasy. But what I remember, like, you know, in my personal life is like I've mentioned like sort of like my event theory of internet culture a while ago. And what I determined the event is that like it is kind of marked by like a similar kind of collective effervescence, but like, you know, sort of a distributed and anonymized one in a way.
Yes.
Where like if you go on 4chan in like December like 2012 2010 and like all of the fucking like all of the fuck if you go on 4chan in like 2007 one day and like all of like the fucking boards just have do the impossible, see the invisible, row fight the power blaring from like the top of the screen. And then like you go on in another day and like all the text is just replaced by putty putty putty, and you have the putty 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 song like playing from like the browser. Like, you know, that feels like you're in something. It feels like you're participating in something. And
which has become what all of modern online-based politics is.
Yeah, and I mean, like, that's one of the interesting things is, you know, these earlier events are very open-ended in nature, I think. Like, you know, there's not anything preventing a random person who is vaguely familiar with 4chan to log on and see that and just feel that sort of wave of like, oh man, I'm in this with everyone together coming in. Or even like something, even for like a way more fucking mainstream example, like, you know, like the event where like Gangnam Style reaches 1 billion views on December 21st, 2012. Like, you know, that's even more open-ended. Like, you know, there's no hard distinction between people who use YouTube and those who don't, or people who know what Gangnam Style is and those who don't. Whereas, like, you know, the sort of online politics end of it, you know, like, that is far more exclusive. There is much more of, like, a feeling of, like, it's us together against them. And the open-ended effervescence has almost entirely disappeared from the internet, I think.
Right. I'm going to add a corollary, which is that I think part of my theory at this point of why, like, reaction got such a solid foothold in and through online politics is that, like, literally that Anonymous, or that, like, the sort of decentralized swarms of the 2012 era never figured out a way of designing deliberately structured, mutually binding politics. So they increasingly only became capable of participating in spectacle around a leader as a site of shared projections, which is what, like, what fascist politics is good at.
Yeah, it's pretty
But
simple.
and people like this is a thing you could see in real time, like how it played out after the initial failure of those movements. There were people who, like the Vibecraft guy or Heather Marsh, who were deliberately trying to design structures and protocols of anonymous cooperation, but largely got ridiculed for, like, some reason or another. They tended to have to be ridiculous people for the same reason that political leaders now within the state are, and then, like, everyone basically assumed that the old Anonymous critique of Anonymous was correct, that they were just, like, boring, like, delusional moral, basically. Like...
Yeah. I mean, one note is, like, wasn't like the Vibecraft guy, like, vaguely aligned with, like, Cassiopeia?
He was Cassiopeia. That was what brought him down.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, what the fuck is this cult thing?
And the other thing is, like, the other thing I'm thinking about is, like, fuck. The other thing I'm thinking about is, like, oh yeah, like, yeah, oh man. I'll circle back to what I was about to say, but, like, the other thing I was about to mention was, like, you know, like...
Also, David Graeber. David Graeber was another one of these attempts at sort of, like, formalizing and theorizing this movement that, like, just never really solidified into anything.
Yeah. I mean, like, one of the things I was about to mention was, like, you know, like, the sort of open-ended effervescence that, like, gets associated with, like, you know, like, I don't know, like, earlier, largely, like, explicitly apolitical, like, internet event. Like, you know, there's a couple of things where, like, number one, that gets coded as soy these days.
Yes.
Like, that like, is just universally dismissed as we did at Reddit.
Yeah.
And number two, I would be willing to bet that is in part because there is a sort of implicit political content to it, regardless of the explicit political commitments of, like, you know, the structures of the event itself or of the participants in the event, which is, like, you know, this sort of, like, non-denominational, universal, open liberalism that celebrates difference in a way that unifies or something. Like, sort of like the 2000s, like, even though, like, the most prominent examples I can cite are, like, on 4chan, for instance, it still, like, fits very strongly into, like, this sort of, like, you know, sort of what I might call, like, 2013 Tumblr ideology. Whereas, you know, I'm thinking the other thing I was about to mention is, like, you know, Cassiopeea. Those guys were, like, some of the first people to seize upon, like, you know, the Matrix as a metaphor for, well, first of all, like, you know, their interpretation of metaphysical reality, but also political reality, because they perceived, like, the chain of politics as extending into, like, the fourth dimension. But they were also some of the first people to seize upon, like, fucking V for Vendetta as, like, a political, like, populist, speaking force, I guess. Like, everyone notes that, like, you know, Moldbug is, like, the first person to use. Everyone notes that, like, you know, like, the manosphere, like, interpretation of the Red Pil, and consequently, like, the alt-right interpretation of the Red Pil, comes ultimately from Moldbug. But, before him, like, you know, before him, like, the Cassiopaea people were using the Red Pil to refer to the idea that, like, you know, like, 9/11 is a lie, Bush is a psychopath, and his government is in bed with, like, man-eating alien. Everyone knows about, like, Project Chanology, and as you've mentioned, like, before in, like, your research, like, you know, like, the invocation of, like, the Guy Fawkes mask is not initially, like, you know, an invocation of, not initially like an invocation of, like, you know, V himself, but rather of, like, you know, fucking epic fail guy who just finds, like, the fucking V mask in, like, a dumpster and just puts it on, and that becomes his brand. Whereas, like, you know, the Cassiopeia people, like, watched V for Vendetta because they were already fans of the Wachowski sisters' work, and they immediately seized upon it as, like, you know, maybe we should all be going out in Guy Fawkes masks and, like, protesting, like, the fucking system that's oppressing us all.
Now I'm wondering how much cross-pollination between early Anonymous and Cassiopeia there was, and how much that was, like, an actual culture or power struggle.
I mean, I'm not sure. I wonder how much there is myself, but, like, I think, like, I would have to contextualize it in the broader sense of, like, you know, just how many fucking people from, like, you know, the anonymous era of activism were, like, really close to RT.
Right.
Really fucking close to RT. Like, that's, like, one of the things that I find is kind of under-remarked upon.
I'm definitely thinking of that. it's I've always found it very, very funny, in a morbid way.
Yeah. I mean, like, you know, like, one thing I could note is, like, you know, there's two, like, major sources, I want to say. There's two major sources. Thank you, Holmes. Retrieving the Guy Fawkes mask from the dumpster literally symbols of the divine emerging from this trash thread and what the fuck. But yeah, like, the couple of things I wanted, like, there's a couple of things which are that, like, you know, a couple of things which are, like, what's it called? Number one, Air America was one major source of, like, this sort of, like, what you might call, like, this new left configuration, and, like, I guess, like, post 2015, like, socialist politics in America. And the other source, like, I guess there's three sources. Like, number one is Air America. This is where, like, you know, like, this is where, like, you know, like, the Young Turks and, like, all of their spin-offs come from. Like, Hassan Piker, for instance, is, like, Cenk Uygur's nephew. Like, Cenk Uygur got his start on, like, Air America and, like, Air America affiliates, roughly, I believe. So, like, Sam Cedar, I think, was an Air America guy. A lot of these people, also curiously enough, like the QAnon guy Lionel was from Air America.
A thing I am starting to sort of think about in terms of just how many of these weird connections there are is just how little time there ultimately is in people's lives and how little sort of like actual time elapses in all of these historical events relative to how much synchronized time is happening.
Yeah. And like, I guess like the second source, like, I would say is like, the second source I would say is like, sort of like the British left, which is like, centered around like this sort of like 90s British left, like the same milieu that like Nick Land came from, like also produced like Mark Fisher and like, the entirety of like Novara Media and whatnot. And like a significant portion of like sort of like the theory left in America is like deeply entangled there. Like Zero Books and Repeater Books and all those like little publishing houses, and like Verso Books is like sort of like the American sister to that. And then like the third source, I would say, is really, this sort of weird post-Occupy, post-anonymous wave of like independent political commentators who were all vaguely associated with RT in some capacity or another. Like Rania Khalek, for instance, had a show on RT. Lee Camp had a show on RT. I think Lee Camp isn't like as like prominent in the left, but he was like, the Occupy comedian for a lot of people. Like a lot of these characters, Abby Martin as well, a lot of these people basically were just like, part of like the broad RT grouping. And I think like one of the interesting things is like, as the actions of Russia as a geopolitical actor have become like more and more on their face incompatible with like positioning them as like victims of American imperialism. Like this sort of like historical lineage where like a lot of people on the left had like their worldviews shaped by like these people who were very often appearing on like open Russian propaganda shows. That kind of gets like kind of memory hold.
Incidentally, one of Anna KW's big sort of like positioning points now is that like Dugin is sort like good but too phallic and too one-sided, but Darya Dugina is actually like this like divine feminine sort of Sophianic almost like prophet.
Oh god, that terrifies me. That just feels too much like fucking like sacral kingship ritual shit to me.
Yeah. And that's a good segue for me to do my Jesus fic, which I wish Amara was still here for. Now I'm trying to decide whether I should do. Yeah.
I apologize for talking about names and it suddenly devolving.
No, that was fun. That was absolutely
no, that's great.
Like, these are all on topic. That's the fun thing about these. Is like everything ends up being related somehow. In fact, I literally just saw this completely synchronistically in my fucking X feed. I'm just gonna post it in the chat.
Don't keep calm. Time to wake up.
Also, that drill quote you posted is like, this is a pure, like, encapsulation of the story of the young boy. Like,
yeah.
Judge orders me to take off my anonymous V mask, and I'm wearing the Joker makeup underneath it. Everyone in the courtroom groans at my shit.
I like that. Yeah, like that one that kind of faded into the background of my mind, but then
it's a sacred clown mask.
Yeah, but then the Death Stranding 2 trailer came out, where what's his name, Mads Mikkelsen's character just shows up in like a very plain mask and then takes it off, and he's not the Joker, he's the Crow more, but it's the same energy.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm trying to decide if I should do the like nativity chapter or the baptism chapter here.
Can you provide some background on what this book is like trying to do?
Right.
It sounded very weird based on the way you introduced it.
It is this was my like 3-day Easter like speed writing project, because I just set myself these challenges periodically. And it is a life of Jesus Christ told as a fan fiction of the manga Shaman King, in which canonically Jesus Christ is a previous Shaman King. The premise of the manga revolves around, I do have to explain this a bit, I guess, because like the entire thing I'm trying to do with this as just like a thought experiment to myself is fit something as close as I can get to the like idiosyncratic model of how I read the Bible into the rules of the Shaman King universe, which takes a bit of the, like, infinite pressure off actually articulating a theology, which, unlike all these people I'm seeing arguing on the timeline, I'm not fucking, like, under any illusion that I have the gnosis to do. And if you are claiming that and you are, like, arguing online like a person on Something Awful forums in 2006, you are not doing that. Like, period. But, like, the Shaman King sort of premise is that there are shamans who are people who can see spirits, primarily like the ghosts of the dead, but also like gods and nature spirits, various beings that have ascended to different levels of spiritual existence. Now, it is implied that almost all of these have at some point just been like creatures living on Earth, even if they have on some level ascended selfhood and become identified with an archetype or something. And they can be, to some extent, like even versions of each other, like different sort of instances, almost, to use AI terminology, or different shards. But all of them at some point had a biological existence, and they live and derive their power from the Great Spirit, which is essentially the world spirit, collective consciousness of everything that lives on Earth. Every 500 years, shamans hold a shaman fight, which is a competition, like, sort of presented very much like an athletic competition, to determine the living human shaman who gets to commune directly with the Great Spirit and sort of determine the next 500 years of history. Now, every great prophet or, like, religious leader, for the most part, like, of world history at these 500 years intervals is implied to have been a Shaman King. So Buddha, canonically a Shaman King. Jesus, canonically a Shaman King. They are referred to as Mr. B and Mr. C respectively, but they have appeared on page.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about, like, what about Muhammad?
Oh, he's sort of... Okay, this is really funny. I don't want to get on a tangent about this, but I also wondered that, and there's a bunch of very, very strange contradicting indications in the manga about this. One, there has been exactly one drawing of, like, the silhouettes of all the G8, which is, like, the sort of the 8 previous Shaman Kings who also sort of operate as a kind of council. Because in the sequel series, it turns out if they don't like the person who wins, they can just, like, basically do a vote of non-confidence and then all have to fight him again. With, like, teams of representatives on Earth. But, which is, again, going to be absolutely insane depending on how many he brings in. Yeah. But, like, the, Mr. Like, I was very curious, exactly, like, how would Jesus even function in a world whose metaphysical setup basically excludes any conventional interpretation of Christianity.
Yeah, this seems extremely heretical. On the face of it. Now, I'm not going. Look, that's not my place to decide, really. But it seems like this kind of interpretation would kind of, turn a lot of heads.
Oh, absolutely. And the thing is, I'm trying to do it as respectfully as possible. I'm not trying to do a, like a wacky gimmick series. I'm trying to do something that is consistent with as much of what... And it helps that, again, I read the Bible and found none of the standard interpretations made much sense either. Incidentally, the one guy who introduced me to a lot of parapolitics shit on Tumblr, like, once, like, the last time I ran into him was in 2022, and I mentioned to him, he was like, oh, you need to go to church or read the Bible. I do both of those, but I was like, I was like, yeah, I'm trying to read the whole thing this year. And he was like, oh, no, never do that. You'll go insane. And at the same time as this, at the same time as he was giving me this warning, he had basically turned into a full-blown Z guy who was, like, posting that Russia would nuke the West on Easter Sunday, and that would be a good thing.
Ooh,
okay, real quick. Going back to, is Muhammad a Shaman King? My theory, I haven't read a ton of Shaman King, but just going off of what I know of Islam, I would say my theory on why it would be ambiguous is that if Muhammad was the Shaman King, he did, like, knock himself out of the ability to be, like, depicted in images.
Yeah.
And so you wouldn't get, like, a picture of him.
There's one of the silhouettes in the G8 who looks sort of like a short guy wearing, like, some kind of, like, desert-style head covering. But I'm not... which would at least, like, get you out of the drawing the face. Also the one shaman who... Okay, I can't even explain this one without spoilers, so I'll just get into my own thing. Again, that nativity or baptism. The baptism one is the one that's, I think, closest to something I would... Oh yeah, also important, like, the way the shamans fight, for the most part, is by, like, either integrating spirits in themselves, so they can use, like, the spirit's abilities, or integrating them in objects using mana and giving these objects, like, the power to just have these sort of aura projected weapons around them, which are called, like, oversouls. And that's its, like, conventional battle shonen mechanic, is the oversouls. But, and this is Takei, who, like, before this tried to write a manga about Buddhist carvings coming to life. So I think that idea is kind of rooted in a Japanese object spirituality thing.
Animism.
Okay. You know what? I think I'll just do the... Yeah, sorry, wait.
Oh, I was gonna say I'd be more interested in the baptism, because, you know,
okay,
at least he'd be an adult in that context.
Yeah,
so.
yeah. No, okay, I'll do that, because this is also the one that is, I think, stands the most without knowing Shaman King lore, and also is closest to stuff that if I ever write a serious novel about the life of Jesus that isn't, like, giving itself plausible deniability through the formal conceit of fanfic, like, this is the closest to having stuff I would include in that. Joshua Bar Joseph didn't think of himself as a shaman. That wasn't really a thing you could be in Nazareth. He was a carpenter. He still saw spirits all the time and talked to them and sometimes studied Torah with them. He learned his craft from the dead as well as the living. People said his houses were good luck, that if a family was pursued by a curse it would not follow them there. He said he always wanted to build places of refuge, like his parents had found in Alexandria, like everywhere he lived felt to him now. In Egypt, of course, he had a lot of accidents with his powers. He accidentally separated the child's soul from his body once. He terrified slave traders in the market with apparitions. Mary told him to stop, but only his friend John could actually teach him how to suppress his mana. John came from a priestly family, and even his mother had learned some tricks in secret from her husband. When he returned to Judea, Mary sent Joshua to the temple to learn, but they kicked him out for asking too many questions. John, on the other hand, had left to join the Essenes. They'll tell you about all the things you're asking about that the temple won't teach you. Okay, but will they let me ask the questions? I've heard they're even worse about that. They're going to train me to join the shaman fight and take back Jerusalem from the priests and the Romans and restore Israel as a light to the nations like in all the prophecies. Imagine what they could do with mana like yours. His mother had mentioned the shaman fight once or twice, but he had no idea what it was, and neither did she. That sounds like too much work. I'll pass. They don't use money or slaves either, and I know you hate those. But I like talking to normal people, too. Joshua's family was happy for him to stay in Nazareth with them, whatever Mary vaguely remembered about the shaman fight. But Joshua missed John and sent him letters. They tell me I'm not allowed to read or answer these unless you are free from all sin. I tell them you must be. You live naturally as an Essene even on the outside. I couldn't even imagine you sinning. They believe me because they can sense my faith. A shaman's strength is determined by his faith. You haven't, right? He hadn't, as far as he was aware, except talking to ghosts. Joshua never expected to hear anyone in Nazareth talking about John after those first few years. All his relatives were dead, and he had been living like an ascetic hermit even before he became one. John and Joshua both liked the wilderness, but Joshua liked everywhere. He's baptizing people into Jordan. What the hell is baptizing? It's the Essene purification ritual. It's different from the mikveh. They pour it on your head. It perfects people's souls and blesses them with wisdom so that they can go to the afterlife reserved for the prophets, the bosom of Abraham, but you have to have repented of all your sins first. Since when did they do something like that for outsiders? John says he's recruiting for something called the Shaman Fight in Jerusalem. Does that mean he's trying to take on the Romans or the Herods? This piqued Joshua's interest. John had explained in a letter what the shaman fight really was, a competition between spirit mediums, representatives of all the old gods and the idols of the nation, but also the prophets of the Lord, and the winner could merge with the presence of the Lord himself like Enoch or Elijah had, and guide the nations for 500 years. Joshua didn't expect to win, or even be accepted. Galilee was full of prophets and exorcists, people who could draw circles and call the rain down from the clouds or badger angels into doing their bidding. But he could tell his mother he had tried, and he could see his childhood friend again, and maybe see what a real shaman did, at least. Besides, he liked water. For such a famous river, the Jordan was surprisingly small, but more beautiful than he could have ever imagined. An even mail of tiny spangles shifted with sheets of sunlight across emerald depths tinted with the by the explosion of greenery along its banks, the brightest and wildest part of the landscape for miles around, the lace hem of a patchwork cloak of fields and orchards. Crowds trampled down unattended crops, butted and jostled between bushes, and were herded toward and away from the Baptist by a line of 7 white-robed Essenes standing across the width of the river. Behind them, Joshua could see almost mechanical figures, made out of intersecting angles of thin, colorless light, towering out of the river. Wings of blades folded around their backs. He knew others couldn't see them, but he couldn't tear his eyes away. Angels? They had shamans who could summon angels and just stand there with them. So faith and life without sin were really that powerful. The figures in the river stood with their arms crossed, their heads down and the shadows of their faces floating on the river surrounded by halos of sunlight. A black X was marked on the back of each of their habits. It's a Roman numeral. It stands for the 10 Commandments, someone whispered in the crowds. No, it's a Greek chi. It stands for Christos, anointed, like what they're doing here. At one edge of the river, they would say, "Welcome, Son of Man." And when the anointed one ascended the other side, they would say, "Farewell, Son of God." John wasn't even wearing their uniform, just the camel skin robe he had been wearing when he left. Joshua grinned. No matter how clean the water, that thing was going to smell awful, unless the baptism ritual magically cleansed clothes as well as souls. He's leading their team in this shaman fight thing, then? No, he says he's waiting for someone else. Joshua splashed heavily through the water, enjoying the feel of it moving around his knees. People stopped at the silent Essenes with their angels to whisper their sins, sometimes for seconds and sometimes for hours, but Joshua waited straight for John. He still couldn't remember any. "John Bar Zechariah!" "Joshua Bar Joseph?" He hugged his friend before he could think about whether it was an offense to his dignity as a prophet. John accepted. His chest was broad and muscular and warm. He smelled like a camel. "Have you finally decided to join the shaman fight?" "I don't know. You think I could control an angel like this? Also, how does this work? The water's a medium for something, right?" John nodded. "But most of these people aren't shamans, right? What does it actually do for them?" "If they have not wisdom, nothing." "That seems like a bit of a rip-off if you're one of them. They're expecting you to save them or something." "If we take the Great Spirit, we will save every soul in Israel. We will create the world as foretold by Isaiah and Daniel. We need the capable to achieve that. Like you. I grew up with you. I know you are. I just feel like I haven't worked for it the way you have, and I still don't understand enough. Also, who's she?" A slight young woman, or boy, was hovering over John's shoulder, where the angels were slanting gradations like a sun in a half-built afternoon sky catching a nest of dust. She was hard to look at as if the sun itself were shining from her skin, but his eyes were still drawn to the curious face under a fireball of fluffy white hair. Her arms were crossed in front of an ill-defined flaring robe or pant, and a small pair of white wings sprouted from behind her shoulders like a dove. "You can see her?" "Yeah, I can see them too. Isn't that why you're trying to recruit me?" "Even our most powerful shamans can't see her without fasting for days. She is wisdom, the wisdom spoken of by Solomon, the Shekinah herself. This is as I hoped. I told the masters I was right about you." He threw his head back in the air, his greasy black hair slapping his shoulders like seaweed pulled suddenly to shore. "You can see her! All she can do for others is plant whispers in their head and read their mana levels. Can you integrate with her?" Joshua knew how integration worked. He did it on the job sometimes when something called for an expertise he didn't have. If she wants to, I can try? She's in the water, right? So put it on me." John stood for a few moments, breathing carefully, before dipping his cupped hands into the Jordan and lifting the water over his friend's head, glittering. Joshua lowered his head in preparation, but his eyes wandered up and he could see the spirit form shrink and shift into a dove of pure white light and settle on the water. When it felt like the sun and the rain were patting his head at once. And then a voice, coming up from somewhere deep inside him, deeper than he knew existed, as if there was a cavern in the center of his body, a dimension he didn't know of pure untouchable water and fire and gold. "Now you can hear me too." I can. "Nice to meet you? I always thought you were a metaphor." "I am. Metaphorein, to carry. When my footprints disappear in the sand beside you, who carries you?" He laughed and remembered where he was in the world, in space, under the sun. "The water feels good between my feet. What does it feel like being it? You can answer that as well as I can. He thought about it for a few seconds, and he could. He laughed again. John was standing over him, the shadow from looking down darkening his face like wet wood. Joshua pointed up at the sun, made John look away at nothing, and then a bird burst out of the branches there, and he laughed too. You can do it. You can integrate our most powerful spirit. You should be able to make an oversoul in no time, and... Another shadow fell. On the whole world, it seemed, from behind the sky, even from behind the sun. Almost none of the pilgrims in the river noticed, but every figure with an X on its back looked up at once, and the angels above them changed their stances and seemed to bristle with strange weapons. Is everything? I'm sorry. I was afraid this would happen as soon as I integrated with the human. My big brother has found me. Wisdom has a big brother? No. Don't think about it. You have to run now. Go somewhere there are no people. We will find a way out of this. We always will, as long as we have faith. His knees moved sluggishly underwater. He threw himself on the surface and swam until it was shallow enough he could run trailing arcs of shine between his ankles. Somebody on the other shore pointed and laughed. Isn't that the guy who didn't confess? Look, put wisdom on him and he runs like a madman. A huge black iron mace fell from outside time and space and struck the water somewhere behind him. He waited for its spray and felt nothing. The 7 men holding it back had not moved an inch. Do not pay attention to them. You must clear your mind and keep it absolutely clear, like a transparent pane of glass. Do not think about anything. Do not desire anything. Do not look for food or shade or shelter. Become nothing, and he will not find us. Do not fear. Above all, do not fear. There was still a crowd on the other side of the river, many of them turning to stare or reaching out to offer help, but Joshua took the clearest path between them as they were statues, and the language center of his brain no longer interpreted their words, only the voice inside him. He counted the days and the nights. He didn't need a self to do that. He sometimes wanted the self to talk to the voice, though. Sophia. The spirit was his only comfort. It was as if he was a mother carrying a child. Had his own mother felt like this, carrying him clueless and comfortable in her belly on the cold, winding roads to Bethlehem? Yes, of course she had. The warm golden weight curled up in his solar plexus. He didn't have an identity, but he was learning hers. The spirit had not just been hidden because she was too powerful for ordinary shamans. She had been hiding on purpose. No wonder people always seemed so silly. In the wilderness, though, it wasn't hard to lose interest in everything else. Even food wasn't crafted as a lure to his desires. He probably could have eaten without desiring it, but she had told him not to. He drank when he could do nothing else, the same as he urinated. There was sun and rain and millions of different textures of ground and shapes of tree and bush to enjoy. Every day he walked over a different hill, and not one of them was the same as the last. Clouds swirled and danced. He could watch them over hours as if it were minutes, and the wars of ants under his feet as if they were pitched battles of Roman legions camped out for weeks, both at the same time. He had felt a bit like this when he was a kid with John, but the faint echo that remembered knew it wasn't the same. He probably couldn't have made it 12 hours without picking a fig then, let alone 40 days. Wasn't that one of the reasons he hadn't gone to train with John in the first place? He also missed John sometimes, wished he could show John these things. Had John really seen them when he was training in the wilderness? At the same time, wisdom talked to him about the world, the communes in the Great Spirit, the shapes of souls that made them, the kinds of pain that shaped them like plants growing, the structure of coin and empire and slavery and how they would melt into air if you turned their own reflection on them, how demons were made and unmade in the same way, how easy it would be to do all this, if she could do anything, if she didn't have to hide from, and this he struggled to understand, herself. She was first, even though she was smaller and weaker in this dimension. She was before this thing chasing them. She gave birth to it, a birth that was a nuclear thunder of pain that still bled through the ragged clouds of sunset. Did my mother feel something like this? Of course she did. But he could have meant any mother, because he couldn't remember her name. He couldn't remember his name. This was, he realized at one point, what happened to nature spirits and higher spirits when they were purified of their identities. He was one among that endless procession, and the shadow behind him could no more identify him than pick one grain of sand out of the Jordan bank. He could do that, couldn't he? Do not think. He was pulled back into the world of desires when he saw a scrawny goat struggling over the crest of a scrubby hill with red ribbon tied around its horns. A scapegoat. Was it Yom Kippur already? He had certainly not missed his fast. No, had it already been? How long had this goat been wandering? Its ribs showed as clearly as his own, and while he smiled and talked to himself, it slumped down against a rock, lifted and dropped its head almost as if beating it, stood up on quivering knees, his own knees were quivering, he hadn't noticed, and took a few more steps, stopped, turned its head to the sky, and let out the most awful, guttering, pleading cry to the empty womb of heaven. He felt the shadow of time and the fear of eternity on him as he carried himself on a wind-bleached walking stick up the slope towards it. Finally, on a gravel peak, he kneeled down and held out his hands where it next collapsed. It rolled its head, and then its feet, waving them uselessly in the air. But that uselessness, at least, was a pure and simple joy like the leaves moving in the wind. It bleated, but still, that could be its last pure and simple joy, and he didn't want it to be its last. It blinked and bleated. Its horn scraped against his knuckles as it rolled on the gravel and flailed. It spat gritty phlegm that landed on his fingers. He picked it up and cradled it to his chest. He could feel its warmth and wisdoms pressing into his heart from either side. Why would an animal even starve in the wild? It was autumn and these parts were dry, but every day he saw birds, snakes, lizards cross the desert on their inexhaustible business. Maybe it was suffering for some other reason. Just because it had been cast out, might never see its family again. Just like him. Because another had died, and it was alive. Just like he remembered what his parents had escaped from him. He cradled the goat as it wept, and remembered where he was and that a human would weep in this situation, and the dam broke. His last precious water ran down his cheeks. "Found you," said the goat consigned to Azazel, and looked at him with eyes like barred suns. It was still a broken, weeping, starving goat, so he didn't stop cradling it. "Who are you?" he asked. He already knew, but wanted to hear for himself. "Lucifer, Halel, Virochana, Shiva, Melek Taus, Abraxas, Yaldabaoth." The list of barbarous names could have gone on forever and meant nothing. 1,000 names, 100 arms. They poured out like diarrhea from the anus of the sun. "I want her back, my always last fragment. She seems like her own spirit to me. Can you leave her alone so I can go back to the world and maybe help this goat?" "Ah yes, the world. My world. The world my rays embrace every inch of. And what will you do there? Become the Shaman King?" "Maybe." "You think you can use her properly without me? All right then." The goat rolled over, picked itself up on its feet and kicked a larger stone. "We're both hungry, both suffering. Turn this stone into bread." "Can I?" He could. He felt he could do it as simply as reaching out and picking it up. Matter transmutation, the philosopher's stone sought by alchemists east and west, was one of the powers of wisdom. How could it not be? "Don't do anything he says. It is written, man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God." "And you think she is God?" "There is no God. Even the Great Spirit is just the stream of souls of this world flowing onward without destination. Or do you still believe he is in his temple in Jerusalem?" He was standing on the parapet of one of the temple's inner walls, sandals slipping on the sharp triangular battlements around the central compound where the Holy of Holies itself was supposed to be kept. He could feel its gaping emptiness beneath him. If she was the Shekinah, then she hadn't been in the Ark. Then hadn't she been in the Ark in the desert all those years? And then somehow with the Essenes as they had always claimed, and now with him? "Point made." He gripped the gold-painted brick. "But irrelevant. God is as real as my faith in him. Can you get me down from here?" "Faith, you say? If your faith counts for that much, then just jump off. For it is written, he shall give his angels charge over thee, to keep thee, and in their hands they shall bear thee up, lest at any time thou dash thy foot against a stone." He didn't want to be in the Temple of Jerusalem. He wanted to be back on the mountain, and find his own way back down at the end. It is also said, "Thou shalt not tempt the Lord thy God." This was, now that he thought of it, a lot like the last time he had been in the temple, with the doctors examining him. Now that he thought of it that way, it was a bit less scary. They could throw the words at him any way they wanted. If he knew them with wisdom, he would still know them right. The goat was gone. Now the actual spirit, Lucifer, the fallen angel, was standing next to him on a slightly higher outcropping. He did look a lot like Sophia, although maybe that was some kind of joke they were both playing on him. The same slight body, his hair the same golden nimbus around his head, but held back by several black iron spikes, like the 7 flanges of his mace. His wings were black where Sophia's were white. Fine, I'll make you the Shaman King. The fallen angel sounded disappointed, bored. It won't be hard. I already control half the most powerful factions. You won't have to use the Essenes and their angels. You won't have to go against Rome. They're afraid to even let me compete. I ruled before the shaman fight was founded. This whole rotation of power wouldn't have to happen if I was still in the big heaven. You could be king forever, not just 500 years. Just use the whole me. You're lying. You're the one who isn't whole. Maybe Sophia wasn't whole either in this dimension, but she didn't have to be. Get behind me, Satan! He shouted into the wind, suddenly, spontaneously angry, using the name the spirit hadn't mentioned, the title by which he was referred to in the book of Job. The one who makes things wrong in order to prove that you are wrong, who makes things right to prove you will accept one thing, one tiny miserable thing, wrong forever. Tempter, adversary, accuser. It is written, you shall worship the Lord your God, and only him shall you serve. The wind fell silent. The sun dipped behind a royal purple cloud. Lucifer smiled and shrugged. Well, I guess it'll be more interesting this way. I doubt you'll find a new answer. The last one I already tried. But it's only fair to give every piece its chance. Good luck with my sister. I'll see you in the shaman fight. He stepped off the edge of the cliff and disappeared. For a moment, the cruelest part was that there had been no goat. Then the rest hit him. Hey, wait! How do I get down from here? But he could already see golden X's glinting in the clouds. The Essenes were coming with their archangels, at his service. As it was written, it turned out either way.
That kicked ass.
That was fucking awesome. I can't wait to read the rest of this.
Just like I was like giddy when it just segued right into temptation in the wilderness. Like,
yeah, that was the passage that, like, I was just sort of working out in my head in church, like, a few years ago, and basically presented as I would, except with the sort of the Shaman King spirit versions of Lucifer and Sophia, which are, like, in part based on, like, Lucifer is based on a Takei design that occurs in the sequel manga, and Sophia's kind of extrapolated from that. Also from the Sophia character that appears in Karakuri Doji Ultimo. But
yeah, no, it is remarkable how well, like, the like philosophical debate of the Temptations, like, maps onto a kind of, let's say, I see it typically referred to as, like, the non-battle shonen structure, where it's like where it is just two people just kind of thinking at each other until one of them backs off.
yeah,
you know,
interestingly, while you were
your death notes or what have you,
yeah.
While you were like mentioning like mana levels in the text, I decided to just like look up mana to like refresh myself on, like, the various anthropological understandings of the term, and I was reminded that, like, there is an Aramaic word, mana, that is used in Mandaeism. That means something rather different, although, like, oddly similar. In the left Ginza, there's this refrain that goes, Mana ana dhahiya rabia, Mana ana dhahiya rurbia, Mana ana dhahiya rabia, which means, I am a mana of the great life, I am a mana of the mighty life, I am a mana of the great life. this is the mana, or like roughly the mind, the soul, the treasure of existence, is lamenting that it has been cast into the physical world. And in the Mandean book of John, this same refrain, Mana Ana the Hierbia, I am a mana of the great life, is very frequently used. And John, in like the context of Mandaeism, is of course John the Baptist. Like Mandaeism regards like John the Baptist as their guide.
Oh. Wow, okay. And I'm also seeing it compared to the Valentinian concept of Sophia.
Yeah, and so like
that's some fun convergent evolution there. Yeah.
Yeah, and so like one of the interesting things about Mandaeism, by the way, is like so are you familiar at all with like, is anybody here like vaguely familiar with the history of the Baha'i faith? Where like in like 1850s Persia, roughly, there was this guy who came around and he said he is named the Bab, that is the gate, and that he is like the one who is preparing the way for him who shall be made manifest. And that he's starting like a new like religion, a new reformation of like the word of God. And he positions it as like a sort of revolutionary movement that like he encourages his followers to like take up arms and like participate in like republican insurrections against the Shah. And then like after like the death of the Bab, like there's a lot of controversy about who is supposed to be him who shall be made manifest. And then this guy comes along and he's deems himself Baha'u'llah, and he says that he is the rightful successor of the Bab. And he says that rather than take up arms in insurrection, rather his mission is to persuade people by peace into adopting a new world system, where everyone can live in peaceful harmony with God. And this I find interesting because like the Baha'i faith is like the much more well-known religion in this instance. More people have heard of the Baha'is than they have heard of like the Bab. And the Babi faith is like relatively small in comparison. There's like a very small number of like pure Babis remaining. And you could say that the same thing kind of applies to like Christianity and Mandaeism. Like everybody knows that like, Christianity splits off from Judaism somewhere around like shortly during or after Jesus' death. But a lot of people don't realize that there's just like a whole community of people who are wandering around claiming that they are the descendants of the original followers of John the Baptist specifically, and that Jesus was like this weird usurper who came around after John the Baptist, claimed to be the rightful successor that John the Baptist had predicted, and started misleading large numbers of people.
That's interesting, especially because it really sounds like just a parapolitical sort of like movement takeover. Like not to cast any aspersions on like Baha'i, but I don't know any obviously, but like, and that is a thing that I am trying to like also point to, or sort of like play the parapolitics of this, including how essentially Mr. C's movement gets cooed after his death, as is implied to happen fairly often to Shaman Kings.
Yeah.
And there is, like, the sequels, it gets very conspiratorial, but, like, the one of the references that I do want to at least clarify to non-Shaman King readers in here is that the thing with the Essenes wearing the X, besides just being a pun on, like, the Christos, it's the implicitly Christian team in the original Shaman King manga that are sort of like played as stereotypical white people, like crusader extremists, but kind of sympathetic, are the X-Laws. Um, they're called that, named that they wear an X instead of a cross. They're sort of named for the Ten Commandments, and the deity they have leading them in the shaman fight, although this may not be their actual deity, it's just the strongest they can get for that particular shaman fight, is Shamash, the Babylonian god of justice.
Yeah.
And, like, their whole thing gets elaborated more and more as the manga goes on. There's some very strange backstory with them, particularly in the like sequels, where Charlie, you can like mute this bit if it's a spoiler or you're concerned about spoilers.
I think Charlie already left.
Oh, already left. Okay. Well, spoilers, but like their founder is like who's like they're founded by a guy who's in what is supposed to be their equivalent of the Catholic Church, who is like a Catholic Church assassin, so far so anime. Also runs a bunch of orphanages, which and he's like the sort of like estranged heir of one of the like big conspiracy families ruling the world, the Italian Rothschilds. They are like explicitly the Rothschild equivalent for the setting, but they're Italian. And the orphanages are implied to have been a child trafficking front.
Interesting. Yeah, so, I mean, like,
So, sorry.
Yeah, like, during, like, your explication of, like, relevant Shaman King lore, I decided to look into, like, you know, I was vaguely aware that, like, you know, there were some, like, religious references in Shaman King. Like, that stuff doesn't, like, really surprise me. That's, like, pretty common in, like, anime and manga and whatnot, where, like, you have, like, these sort of weird, like, from Western perspective, like, weird interpretations of world religion through, like, a very different cultural lens. But, like, yeah, I wasn't actually aware of, like, the whole, like, Frayabis thing.
Yeah.
Which, like, now I'm seeing what you're talking about, where, like, Shaman King gets into, like, Twyman shit, because, like, wait, you're telling me about, like, this, like, fucking, like, Templar demiurge character who is, like, also the founder of capitalism.
Yeah.
Okay.
So would you believe me if this is actually the second weirdest implementation of Jesus Christ in manga that I have seen?
Oh, absolutely. I'm sure I could also get into D. Gray Man and how like secretly Twyman pilled that is. Yeah.
Oh man, so D. Gray Man, when I haven't gone back to it since it went on kind of like a forever hiatus, and I guess it eventually did come back and finish maybe, but like I remember the author's health declined. It was just like chapters stopped coming out, I guess. But anyway, are any of you familiar with JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Steel Ball Run?
Oh yeah.
Like that one.
It's getting an anime soon. It's finally getting adapted.
Yeah. All I will say that, because to avoid like the spoilers of it all is that it is the real world depiction of Jesus Christ that most aligns with Steel Ball Run is Mormonism.
Interesting. I was just about to say I'm mostly familiar with Steel Ball Run because of that like page where like the older woman like asks, just is like trying to like seduce the president's daughter, but she's just going like, "Come on, sit on my face. I want to feel your ass squish me."
Yeah, that's
You know, of all the panels to have been a thing that people know about Steel Ball Run, I would not have expected that to be among them, because I've not heard of that one being.
Apparently that like actually became like a meme in like East Asia. Specifically.
The context is that it's not the president's daughter, but yeah, it's that's just one of those weird JoJo's gonna JoJo moments. But yeah, most of the Steel Ball Run memes I see are variations on talking about pimple popping fetishes, or fall off your horse, or singing about mozzarella.
Yeah. I think like from like the Korean like Namu wiki, like there's like a paragraph that says, in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Part 7 Steel Ball Run, First Lady Scarlet Valentine gets excited when she asks Lucy Steele to put her face on her ass. Really, hurry, it's a pressure fest. Press your face. She left a famous saying, and like this is like sort of auto-translated as far as I can tell, but like I guess in like the original Japanese, like the wording is like it's a pressure fest, which became like the like mimetic part of it.
Huh.
Yeah, like so Steel Ball Run was being initially published in the era of there is no good localization for any of these manga.
Yeah.
Like I actually started reading JoJo's Bizarre Adventure while Steel Ball Run was in the middle of being published, which meant that I had like just the most like going from part 1 up through 7 is the most hodgepodge collection of scans and translation groups known to man. And in fact, I was in fact forced to read the Duang scans of Diamond is Unbreakable.
Yeah.
Which I think I'm actually really glad that I did, because like that is a part that, like, you know, as long as you get the gist of what is going on in a scene, you don't really lose any of the punch, and just the bad translation is just really funny.
A lot of the Shaman King translations that are still up online are like Duong tier. But now I find we're in that place for like web novel translations.
Oh yeah, they're so I think that the difference with web novel translations nowadays is that they aren't like amateur hand translations. They're just bad machine translations.
Right.
But I think the thing that was actually hampered in my JoJo reading, what that wasn't actually corrected until I watched the anime, is that I fully understand why "How Does King Crimson Work" was a fandom meme.
Yeah.
Because it was a combination of a bad translation and the fact that was a power that is just bad for comics as a medium. Because it is a power that fucks with sequential time by snipping out parts of it out of causality, which is impossible to properly depict in a medium in which you are only viewing snapshots of sequential time with the gaps in between already implicitly erased. or implicitly like invisible to you as the audience. It is so much clearer in animation with a actual professional localization. What is going on there? Like it's just really really interesting that like this really cool time power was first debuted in like the worst possible medium to depict it in.
Okay. I do have something to read. It's very short. Um, and I was debating whether to read it at all. But knowing the kind of I guess channel this is, I guess it wouldn't be totally out of line, and it wouldn't be it wouldn't be treated the same way it would be, I think, in other places. So I have to provide context for this one. Like it would like I it's a given. I have to provide context. So I've been reading. So I have a Substack, and I've been reading for uh, yeah, I've been reading some publications on it. It's from what I can tell, Substack is in comparison with X and Blue Sky as like as a platform, it seems to be generally right leaning, but unlike X, it does so in a kind of just because of the nature of the platform, it does so in a, at least in with more pretenses of kind of intellectualism, um with more pretenses of argument and making a good point. There isn't that much like kind of like screeching, right? And just pure id. Um, but but there is like but there is still there's still some ideological mix. Um, what one thing that's kind of taking up Substack and a few other publications are kind of outside of it is this issue of like men in literary fiction. Where are they going? Why are there less of them proportionately speaking now, especially at the big publishers, the big five, um, and and a bunch of different writers have their own ways of spinning it. Um, and some will be more specific, and they will say white male literary fiction, um, literary fiction authors. Where are they going? Um, and uh, and you see a lot of pussyfooting concerning this topic, um, and the opinions said on them are usually pretty lukewarm or mildly uh, you know they either show some concern or faux concern, or they are simply not concerned. The original New York Times article basically says, "Oh, it's not that concerning. Oh, it's actually a good thing." But like it's all very superficial. But I thought I could turn it into something very, very monstrous and experimental. Just because it's very, it seems like it's something that gets clicks on the basis of this kind of shared implicit recognition of something very, something very, uh, I don't know, very sexy and violent. But no one really, but like it's something that kind of just gets, that's only like implicit. But because I am the way I am, I can't stop. I just can't not let that stand. I had to make it explicit. So here's an article that's really a piece of experimental fiction, kind of creating an egregore out of that implicit understanding. Okay, with that out of the way, here we go. Where did the fucking white males go in literary fiction? Something that's been going on for a long time, far too long, is finally being recognized. No surprises there, since all recognition comes too late. However, what's been recognized recently is of such monumental importance that the lag can not only be excused, but justified as well. But now, thankfully, everyone who's anyone is talking about it. As the title lightly suggests, what's got everyone so worked up is the disappearance, one could say the dissolution, of fucking white males in literary fiction. Yes, it's all true, all of it. There are less fucking white male literary fiction auteurs in all the top American publishers. Vanity Fair, The Atlantic, Squire, The New York Times. In fact, zero over the past decade or so. There are less fucking white male leads in new works of fiction published by these publishers. And even when there are, they are written by someone who isn't a fucking white male. Wow. What does this all signify? What does this mean for us Americans? Does it mean anything at all? As a distinguished Substack writer, I would not be writing this if I did not think that there was some meaning to discover in this phenomenon, meaning that one digs out like one digs out gold from a newly found deposit zone. If I could not find meaning in the phenomena that constantly dart my eyes like little fairy sprites, I would go insane. And you don't want that to happen, do you? But luckily for us all, there is so much meaning in this plight affecting the fucking white male community recently. Let's look at what others have had to say about so concerning a development. To begin with, David J. Morse from the historically honored New York Times wants to make it crystal clear that not only is there nothing wrong with women gaining the upper hand, not only in literary fiction, but also in college achievement over the past 2 decades, it should be welcomed with open arms. It is only because this zero-sum game has ended up in proportionately elevating the gremlins that goon to porn, play the vidya, listen to podcasts. No, not. Yes, it is only because this zero-sum game has ended up proportionately elevating the voices of gremlins that groom to porn, play the vidya, listen to podcasts listen to podcasts about why strong men should beat up women while worshiping Allah, and inadvertently hoorah the decimation of their purchasing power, that we, mostly smart, college-educated women, should be quaking in fear. Do any of these relatively new tendencies make white men good anti-patriarchal, pious, well-behaved citizens in a modern, civilized empire? David thinks not. But this presupposes that novels, literary fiction especially, is capable of and suited to breeding good fucking persons. But what if, on the other hand, literary fiction is in fact one of the greatest vectors for evil and chaos that the world has ever known, and in fact best inflames a latent positive evil found in everything that thinks and speaks? Theodore Adorno pointed out that the Germans read a lot of novels, and we know how they ended up. But we are being too presumptuous. We agree with David's conclusion, up to a point, that young white men should be reading more literature and gooning less. It would make them more self-conscious. Today, we value particular groups of all kinds becoming self-conscious and allowing their voices to be broadcasted to everyone that has the stomach to hear it. We crave self-conscious self-expressions of powerful selves like we crave medium-rare sirloin steaks. In this case, it would be very different, but could be furthered on the basis of this value, which we still trust like we trust the dollar. David's perspective is surely nothing to scoff at, but we must keep venturing because we love going on adventures. Compact Magazine, the digital currency era publication that has no problem with featuring iconoclastic post-Marxist writers from across the political spectrum like Nick Land and Slavoj Zizek, squeezed out an issue that ditches the implicit appeal to civic virtue. Jacob Savage, how appropriate, in an unpolitically correct formulation, says that fucking white males in particular are dissolving from the literary landscape. Where are the John Updikes, the Martin Ameses, the William Burroughses, all these renegade rock star fucking white males oozing charisma, charm, and irresistible sex appeal? Did they all tragically die after the great orgy of the 60s and 70s and the Gen X after party hits? Yes, they did. And The Savage is not a happy Boy Scout. Quote, the kind of novel we think of as the literary novel, the updike or Delilo, I think is harder for right men, a leading fiction agent told me, in part because I don't know the editors who are open to hearing a story of the sort of middle to upper middle class white male experience. The young agents and editors didn't come up in that culture. The agent proceeded to list white male writers who have carved out a niche for themselves. Nathan Hill, Joshua Cohen, Ben Lerner, Michael Connolly, Adam Ross, but none was younger than Cohen, who was born in 1980, unquote. Fucking white males, middle and upper middle class ones especially, can't see any heart-wrenching or politically polarizing depictions of their contemporary super personal experiences when they visit a color-coded bookstore with your young fucking white male offspring. They feel alienated from the lack of adequate representation on the shelf. This means they have no voice, so they cannot speak or shout. It's not like they stopped writing completely. They sometimes write genre fiction, or historical fiction, or nonfiction, or they write with their bearded mouths via podcasts or sports commentary channels or fitness TikToks. Yes, all of these avenues taken prove that fucking white males have not disappeared to court yet. But what has disappeared is their ability to communicate truth, even if only their truth. The Savage puts it thusly, quote, unwilling to portray themselves as victims, cringe, politically wrong, or as aggressors, toxic masculinity, unable to assume the authentic voice of others, appropriation. Younger white men are no longer capable of describing the world around them. Instead, they write genre fiction. They write suffocatingly tight autofiction. They write fantastic and utterly terrible period pieces, anything to avoid grappling directly with the complicated nature of their own experience in contemporary America. Unquote. A harrowing indictment. When fucking white males can't speak about anything that is truly and exclusively their own without editors and publishers rolling their eyes or calling for their beheading in front of the White House, they can be said to be lost on the road of the zeitgeist. Lost, fuckless white men, or should we say young boys, do not possess that spiritual authority given to those that are placed in the spotlight, which grants them publicly recognized dominion over their land, even a fragment of it. Americant white nationalists now have the legitimacy, or even less, of the natives they once displaced onto reservations. Divine irony or cosmic tragedy enabled by civilizational forgetfulness and technological enframing? Either or neither way, this cannot stand. Something must be done. Something must be done. Something must be done. In the world of literary fiction. So, we know the problem. Well then, what is to be done? Maybe a place to begin would be a suggestion from Naomi Kanakia, a professional trans-Indian woman, nonfiction writer, who has garnered quite a reputation on here, not for her own literary fiction, but for her biting commentary on the world of literary fiction and its relation to great books. No shade there. If this post blows up, this publication will follow in her opportunity-hunting footsteps. Fiction doesn't even do well on Substack. Personal essays, media commentary, and talking about the current thing does. Anyway, this is her suggestion. Quote, the solution is, honestly, to be like John Pastilli and Arkhand and Caleb Caudell in Delicious Tacos and Alexander Sorondo. Self-publish. Whatever audience actually exists for these books, you publish for that audience. This, too, is how trans writers started out. Two of the most successful trans women writers, Gretchen Felker Martin and Tori Peters, got their start self-publishing their work for an audience of other trans women. Even to this day, there's a cottage industry of self-published books by trans women. Self-published authors like Alison Greaves persist in their popularity, even though trans women writers have so much representation now at the big presses. And that's because the trans books that come out from big presses don't necessarily serve the actually existing community of trans readers. Moreover, when trans writers generally target trans readers, then they can market to them in a much more granular way, i.e., go your own way, build real power. There's something very ominous and frightening about this advice, but also something very liberating. And we love liberation, don't we, folks? If trans people can write empowering things for each other and for their interest, why can't fucking white males? For too long, fucking white male literary fiction writers have relied on big impersonal institutions giving them big deals and big piles of fuck you money. But as the rap icon Snoop Dogg said, mo money, mo problems. Money and fame are great sources of power, but is this power real? Is it genuine? Is it authentic? Full of life? Full of suffering? Full of struggle? Full of triumph? Only apparently, it seems. Much better, then, to acquire real power via catering to and symbolically amplifying the in-group, no longer assumed to be the default. It's easy to imagine true renaissance in fucking white male creativity in literary fiction. Of course, things will start with simple efforts like self-publishing on Amazon with help from AI agents or setting up online indie publishing studios. However, in the near future, physical fraternal organizations of fucking white male writers will be constructed, like the gentlemen's clubs of Victorian England. There will be formations of pacts and clans, where each one would be fully in tune with its artistic vision and spiritual self-conception. All this will come up as a set of projects built from the bottom up rather than top down, and the success or failure of them would in no way be bound to previous national or imperial loyalties undermined by deglobalization. So many different and unique expressions of authentic experiences in literary fiction will come out of this. Another trans woman, Nix Land, wrote about the selective pressures trans women and queers more generally face in passing. Quote, quite simply, those who don't pass either of these tests usually don't survive the queer Darwinian ratchet. Only the strongest queers survive the hell that society puts them through. And this reaches a fever pitch in the demographic with such disproportionately high suicide and murder rates as with trans women. Unquote. Fucking white males may not have a high suicide and murder rate right now, but if the GIAC paper is right, then they might very soon. They won't, and to a great extent don't, today, have the privilege that permits them to speak in their own voice about their multi-generationally guaranteed professional accomplishments, their submissive flowers blowing in the country breeze, their country plains looked down upon from mountainous heights. This seems like dreary prospects for fucking white males. But don't hard times create good men? Sure, the eventual eradication of the male sex entirely from the gene pool would spell the end to all of this. But until that point comes, shouldn't fucking white males who write literary fiction take full advantage of the fruits of gender acceleration? As was already said, shouldn't they make use of open source AI systems in an agile way? Shouldn't they proliferate swarms of masculine coded symbols full of whiteness everywhere on the net via distributed and decentralized command structures? Shouldn't their fiction not only reflect the changing times, but actively ride their currents? These are all rhetorical questions. But it's not only true that fucking white males should do these things. They have to do them. Adapt or die, right? That's what I have.
I cannot express just how much I had to resist laughing when I realized halfway through that fucking was not just a word for emphasis. It was, in fact, an adjective.
Yes.
Part of the proper noun, no less.
Yeah.
No, it's part of the package.
Yeah, I had to realize, I realized at some point that you were, invoking the phrase fucking white males as part of, I'm recalling that one meme from, fucking 2015, 2016, or whatever.
Yes.
Yeah. The
You're
guy's
a fucking white male. Exactly.
Yeah, you're fucking a white male.
Yes.
Yeah.
Are you kidding? Are you kidding? Yes. Yes, I was thinking of that.
Oh, God,
I'm bringing that all the way back. And
remember,
I think that, yeah, I think it had to be done. It gives it a kind of unity. That kind of stems from this, tension that all the way back in the times of Gamergate was already present, right? Back in the times of Gamergate, already there. I'm just forcefully bringing it back up. Yeah, just here with this new thing. Ugh.
Yeah, I just remember when the right wing gave them the nicknames Carl the Cuck and AIDS Skrillex.
Yeah, I think I do remember Carl the Cuck.
It's legitimately kind of terrifying how many people know this stuff, and there was a whole like micro-generational, people are now starting to notice like the micro-generational splits in Gen Z, where like you have the ultra radicalized, like, take kids and stuff in just like
Yeah.
the last few years, and then people like just a few years older than them are completely different. But you
Yes.
also had these before, and like 2016, 20, like that era was its own cultural environment, very much like that, that's just been memory hold because most of those people grew out of it in some way.
Or
Yeah, everyone's
sublimated
just
it.
collectively
Yeah.
They
embarrassed of
sublimated
it.
it
They don't want to
often.
bring it up.
Basically, one thing I want this article to do is uh it's actively merging these generational uh I guess divides like into into like much higher stakes um like conceptions that usually get blocked by means of these divides.
Yeah.
Like yeah.
I really should introduce you to or you should talk more to Will Tidwell, uh, because one, this reads a lot like how his criticism reads, um, like the same sort of like maximalist alt-lit defamiliarization voice, going sort of from thought to thought rhizomatically in these big blocks. Um, and also like he was around for a lot of that shit.
It's weird. I completely I missed the alt lit, I guess, um time, zeitgeist, you could say. And now I just hear a bunch of things now about like, whoa, why it sucks so much. Why does everyone what was wrong with it? Why did it have to die? And I don't at this point I don't really have an opinion on alt lit. I just wasn't in it. I wasn't around it. I didn't really read it. So it's just this kind of weird ghost that I'm kind of occasionally run into.
And it is another one of these ghosts that is everywhere, even though very few people actually experienced it in real time, too. Like, it is. I picked up a random, like, sort of prestige, like, female coded literary fiction, like, Booker Prize winner at the library the other day, The Wren by Anne Enright. It's by a 62-year-old woman, and it kind of reads like alt-lit. Like.
I wonder if the reason this kind of, based on what I know, I wonder if the reason this comes off as kind of alt lit ish is because it's written in this kind of article like style. It's written kind of like an article.
Yeah, but I'm also
Um,
thinking of the thing that I'm thinking of here, and again, this is just me making a formal comparison that implies nothing about influence. I'll make
okay. If it
a
was
Hiroyuki
unintentional,
Takei
if that.
draws like I don't even know who I want to compare him to. I'll make comparisons across a century or more completely rhizomatically like
That's
that. The thing
completely fine.
I'm the thing I'm like I think most noticing and connecting with Will Tidwell, who I also has like a conflicted relationship to that term, um, is like the almost like repetitive structure of series of questions and rhetorical statements, like this sort of like build up and this almost like Herzog-y kind of voice. Like that's the sort of like nonfiction crossing to fiction style, and that's even the thing I was noticing in like the Wren, which is also like it's it has a Sally Rooney blurb, and Sally Rooney's latest book is also kind of like this. It's like literary fiction about like constructed fictional characters written like autofiction. To be clear, I mostly like this. There's a couple places where I'm like, okay, that sentence like didn't need to be added to this. It's just like,
Yeah.
but it is a sort of.
What?
I'm remembering the HTML giant essay about defamiliarization that was a big touch point.
How do you send you the money?
When I was like sort of formulating my own style and like the aesthetics, really. I'll see if I can link that. HTML
Yes,
giant
please do.
defamiliarization.
Yeah, I'm still just thinking.
It's like I write almost as far from alt-lit as one possibly can stylistically now, but it was still very formative moment for me.
Let's see. What is this? Victor Slowski wants to make you a better writer. Part 1. Okay.
I'm just thinking. Like, with regard to like the invocation of like fucking white male, there's a couple of things I'm thinking about, which is like number one, AIDS Skrillex was a pretty good mean nickname, I think. Like, it's short and it's very derogatory.
And
it's
a defamiliarizing combination. It's like a startling word pair.
Yeah. But like Carl the Cuck is like, it's so phoned in.
Why is he Carl? Just because it alliterates? Yeah.
Yeah, just because it alliterates. It feels like that's like the real moment where it feels like that's like the real moment where you like begin to see Pole boomerizing, kind of, where like it just starts losing the juice. It's like the best thing you have is like Carl the Cuck. Come on, like.
Incidentally,
Cuck is
I've
right
also
there.
been trying to. I've also been trying to do like a chapter for like my actual academic work. A like chapter I'm submitting to a collection on virtual reality literatures where I'm trying to talk about lit RPG and stuff. And in the course of my research, keep coming across like I got into this through isekai and xianxia. I hadn't really looked at Western lit RPG much, and it had barely even got off the ground when I first had this idea, I think. But now when I search it, one of the main things that comes up, and the only thing that has like any academic literature written about it, which is as much accident as anything, but is something called Dungeon Crawler Carl. And it looks
that is like the big one.
Tell me about Dungeon Crawler Carl, because I'm trying to figure out like what its deal is at a glance.
I actually don't know is the problem.
Okay.
Because like
I don't either, but I have a guess, and I'm curious how accurate it is.
I write a web novel, but I slid into the space sideways. Like I did not cut. I started serializing this on a whim on a social blogging site, and then when that shut down, I needed to find a place to host web fiction. It's like, yes, here's Royal Road. This is where people post web novels. What the hell is a lit RPG? Oh god.